You know the drill.
And we'll hope that Betty will join us in a moment here. I didn't get a message that she's missing or something.
Okay, so while it loads, I'll begin if that's okay. So this regular board meeting will be conducted pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N2520, which suspends certain requirements of the Ralph M. Brown Act. In compliance with Governor Newsom's executive order in response to an ongoing COVID-19 outbreak, the district will conduct the Board of Education meeting as a teleconference. Please use the following telephone number and meeting ID to call into the meeting: 1-6699-009128, meeting ID 882-0508-3878, password 423632. Or you can join on a computer, and the link is on our website, available at TUSD.org. Public comment can be submitted via email to the superintendent's office at superintendent@TUSD.org. Submissions will be read aloud during the public meeting. Submissions can be received 30 minutes prior to the start of closed session of the board meeting. The guidelines for public comment will be in accordance with Board Policy 2350. And reasonable accommodations for any individual with a disability who require to participate in public board meeting may request assistance by contacting my office at the above address, or the main district office, or 310-972-6001, or fax 310-972-6012. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just to reiterate that there will not be the opportunity for live comment this evening, but we do welcome written comments that we will gladly read into the record. We are returning from closed session, so thank you for being here. We tried to be here on time this evening for you all, so we're not holding you up. Welcome to the guests that are here with us. We do have about 100 folks here joining us, and glad to have you. I do want to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's go ahead and stand, and I will lead the pledge, actually. We do have a flag. Oops, it's over here. All right, ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you all for participating in that. I just think it's important to remember why we're here doing what we're doing. It's very important work on the behalf of our community. I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt the agenda for September 8th, regular meeting of the Board of Education. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We have no report out of closed session this evening. So our next item, we'll go ahead and move on, is a staff presentation and information. And it is a presentation of the proposed 2020-2021 Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. Now you'll notice that that acronym is the LCAP, but it's not the same LCAP that we've done in previous years. And I believe that probably Katie will address that. Okay, so Dr. Crumpy, you are on.
Thank you. And you're right. You stole my thunder, Mrs.
Oh,
Reagan.
sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. As you know, about the time that we were finalizing that 2020-2021 local accountability and control plan, or the LCAP as we know it, the state suspended it and instead required the schools to design a new one-year learning continuity and attendance plan. I think they thought that was funny.
Yeah.
We call it the LCP, not to confuse it with the LCAP plan. And this plan was mostly to ensure that we were monitoring student learning during the pandemic and monitoring our lost learning mitigation funds, especially for our most vulnerable students. Next slide, Gil. Although the plan template was not released until early August, we have been working on ensuring that high levels of student learning since last spring. The strong input from the multiple committees that have been working tirelessly, I think, helped us create a very solid plan. Next. Just to kind of backpedal just for a second, our spring school design provided time for our students to receive help without missing out on the core instructional time. Whether meeting teachers during office hours, attending tutorial sessions, or receiving special ed services, all were available during non-instruction time as we worked hard to mitigate our any learning loss. We additionally, although not in person, we were able to provide some virtual summer programs for some of our students needing additional support. Next. Stakeholder engagement. I think multiple committees really worked throughout the summer to assist us in creating this plan. Like the traditional LCAP, the plan required consulting with our bargaining units, DELMAC, our principal advisory committee, and we also include DCC, our district communication committee, which is made up of mostly of an elected school site council member parent from each school. They've also, although that's not required, they have been really invaluable in assisting us and providing guidance all the way back to March. I think it was my very first Zoom session that I had to lead was getting our DCC parents on board and getting input from them. Next. And so many items within this plan were added, modified, or expanded based on all of these committees' contribution. For example, the bell schedules from our instructional committee recommended weekly professional learning communities, or PLC time. I think you will see that throughout the plan. This was only enhanced by TTA, who ensured that PLC time was carved out even in shorter weeks when less time was available. PD, our professional development, was also recommended, I think, by every group that we talked or consulted with. The topics were developed and modified during our many parent meetings, and specifically ensured that there were parent trainings and that were needed to best help them support their children as we move on. Next, Gil. So there's 5 main areas to the plan. I think they're pretty logical. One is, and I want to remind everyone too that this plan and template was approved ahead of the governor closing our schools down, and most of our work throughout the summer was to return students to school. And so the first part of the plan was learning continuity when kids are in school. The second part is learning continuity when students are learning from home. The main thrust of this plan is loss of learning. How are we helping our struggling learners? Also, how do we engage those kids who are absent and not engaging in class? How do we re-engage them? And finally, the mental and social emotional health of our students and our staff. So really, we've already heard about a lot of this work because the instructional committee spent all summer 90 to 100 pages of notes on a lot of the things that the board has already heard and have made it into the plan. The AM/PM model for elementary, our alternate day model for secondary, that PLCs, and really our PD focus has been on engagement with students. How do we instruct to keep kids engaged, through virtual learning? Also, I think is really important, maybe a new concept for people in this plan is to provide classroom supervision or substitutes for teachers who are quarantined. So what does this mean? Again, learning continuity is kind of our new, middle name. What happens when a teacher is quarantined and at home, and you provide a substitute maybe for a geometry class for 2 weeks until they're allowed to come back to school. And maybe there was a student that they were exposed to in period 1, but they teach period 2, period 3, period 4, and so on. And we know, we have a substitute who try as they will, but not as proficient in every subject that teacher might teach. We think that really puts our kids behind. So if the teacher is able and willing to teach from home, we can provide supervision into those classes so that learning continuity is not lost. So that is one part of this plan. Also, additional teacher sections for our English learners. They struggled. We have quite a bit of data, and we want to on their struggle last spring, and we really want to be proactive with their workshop classes, their sheltered sections, and other student supports throughout the year for them. And although not a cost per se in our plan, we heard quite clearly from our parents that, especially remember, this part of it is for when we are in school, that especially our elementary kiddos, they're going to need that childcare support that our YMCA is so kindly been partnering with us, so that the AM kids can have somewhere to stay in the afternoon and vice versa. Next, go. And now here's where we are now. What do we do? How do we ensure consistency regardless of the method of delivery? You see that PLCs again, that consistency that between the blended and distance learning teachers meeting weekly to discuss the essential standards. We'll be developing common formative assessments, and having that discussion across platforms is very important to this consistency. So is the professional development that we're doing and will continue to do. Students' access to devices and connectivity, as well as the learning platform that our elementary students are using and have access to. Go. For this next session, our meaty section of the plan, we really tried to design this with maximum flexibility so we can pivot when needed and adjust to best meet the needs of our students. We continuously receive new guidance on who we can help, when we can help, how we can help, and we need to be flexible so we can use the guidance that we're given and use the data to inform the decisions that we're making. You see a few things in here that we kind of already know about. That when we are allowed to return to school, we've got strong plans in place for our special education, self-contained kiddos to be able to stay for a longer day, for the AM or PM for elementary, and on alternate asynchronous days for secondary. English learner interventions, and that's kind of starred asterisk because I'm going to talk about that in the next presentation. But our low-income foster homeless youth, and providing really, I think the crux of this is that we can get the students that need help to school more often for more assistance. And basically with that umbrella, everything that fits in there is kind of the flexibility that we wrote for, so that we can provide that needed instruction. Finally, on this one, there's 3 pots of money that kind of make up the lost learning mitigation money. 2 of the smaller pots have deadlines that allow us to spend the money after December. The big pot of money actually expires this December 2020. So with the additional smaller pots of money, it lets us, we know that as long as this pandemic goes and the longer it takes us to get more kids safer back in school, that we're going to have work to do outside of this school year. And so providing some extended school year supports, whether that's summer or through the next school year, this 2021 through 2022, are also written into the plan. Go. And then we kind of talk about this re-engagement strategies, and this is a fancy term for attendance issues. And people who are not attending to school, they're not participating, they're not being successful, they're not work completing. And really a main thrust here is to be able to repurpose some of our current positions so that we have all hands on deck. Our deans and our campus security that maybe don't have students to supervise, or discipline right now. Our attendance clerks that usually have long lines of readmits and phone calls to confer with parents. Student supervision assistants, those are also known as elementary noon aides or middle school noon aides. You know, really all hands on deck for the plans that the schools are creating to re-engage students that are struggling, you know, we're struggling in school. As mentioned already, our foster homeless kids are really in need of additional supports. Looking forward to providing them some things as soon as the county health department, you know, permits. And it's also become very apparent that we need to increase some translation services into more languages than we've been offering. I think easier when kids are in school and are hearing things and are able to help with the translations with parents. Very difficult when no one's at school and that communication isn't happening to a great extent. We need to make sure that our families are understanding what it is we're asking of them. And finally, last but not least, Gil, is the mental and social emotional well-being of our kids and our staff. Additional counseling services, we're trying to put as much mental health services and supports in place as we can. That really comes with a lot of monitoring and check-ins. We had a student check as part of registration, and we've got some counselors that are really rocking it right now. I received a call from a brand new parent to our district with 2 new foster children who filled something out, like a kind of a daily little wellness check. And within that little wellness check was a box where, you know, would you like a call? And she said, gee, within the same day of her returning that, you know, that wellness check, that school counselor had a call and said, how can I help? And that, you know, that's really what we're striving for. And as soon as we can, starting some of those second step curricular K-8, you know, supports for our kids is very important. And I think finally, and a lot of us are saying this, you know, we really just need to be sensitive and compassionate and flexible and really understanding for all the different situations that we have with our staff, our families, and our students as we you know, move forward and work through this current pandemic that we're in. And that is it.
Okay, any questions, comments from board members?
I have some questions.
Okay, Dr. Gerson?
In a previous board meeting, and even in parent Q&A, I remembered that we were told that schools would be sharing the course workload between schools for the distance learning model. How did the situation evolve from sharing teachers between schools to doing all of this initial scheduling within schools?
Do you have a specific level that you're talking about, Mr. Gerson? Because this is a little bit off of what this learning plan is as far as how schools are started up the school year. Like this is, but.
Well, I saw in the slides, you know, we were talking about the task force and committee involvement. And so I was wondering, and you know, we all got a parent email who explained the perspective from the secondary level, and I had explained to Dr. Stowe kind of what it looked like at the elementary level, but I was just trying to figure out how we got to that point.
So if I understand your question correctly, so separate from this being part of the learning plan for the year, when we asked parents to choose between distance and blended,
Yes.
And then they had to start creating how many sections of each that would be. I mean, that's how it evolved. When you know, staffing and then work with our classroom teachers who had you know, preferred or needed distance learning versus blended learning, and then trying to match that all together. When different situations arose so that they could create schedules that that worked for our teachers that had different medical conditions that required or that requested of them to be, you know, distance learning, and kind of match them up with the kids. So for example, if I had, you know, 15 distance learning students at my school for a given class, and another high school had another 15 kids, you know, within a class for distance learning, you could put those two together, and now you have an entire section of a class that we could offer. So they first tried to do it within their own school. And I think the larger the school, the easier that is. The smaller the school, the harder that is, you know, to happen. And then they tried to first do it within their school, and then they tried to, you know, ensure that we didn't want to have to say no to as many people as possible. So we tried to maybe overcommit to ensuring that regardless of the platform that they wanted, we were able to offer the majority of the classes that kids wanted.
If I can interrupt, I think you hit on my question in the reverse, saying that we started with trying to do it internally and within school and not looking at between school. So I know that it seemed like at the secondary level, it was only when things were their direst, when we're at a point where it's like, oh, what do we do with these kids? Okay, well, now we'll go to working between schools. You know, when I look across the district at the elementary level, the number of combo classes is, I mean, everything's a combo class, it looks like from my perspective. And so it seems like that we completely went to within school scheduling and not between school scheduling to, you know, and so I want to know how we got from that presentation point where the expectation was cooperation between schools to last resort or insurmountable number of combo classes.
I don't know if Dr. Kim wants to mic up and help me with this. I can tell you that when the very first school had to move 3 kids to another school, Mr. Hahn, did we hear from almost every single one of those parents? Parents don't want to leave their school, and they beg, and then they get angry, and you know, and I think, and our elementary, you know, people don't want to lose their families, and even though we have, you know, said that we would, you know, of course they aren't leaving their school. I think, you know, easier said than done when all of a sudden they aren't going to be with, you know, their friends and or anyone that they know, or, you know, to a great extent. So, but I you know, I don't want to, you know, over explain. Dr. Kim, do you have anything to add?
Dr. Krempe, I'd concur. We did put an emphasis on trying to keep students and families within their own neighborhood school. We felt and we heard from teachers, administrators, and parents themselves that they really didn't want to go to another neighborhood school or another area if they didn't have to. So we did attempt to try to place them in distance learning classes at their own school site first. Now, it did not always work.
I don't understand what it means. We weren't transferring people to other schools, so I'm confused. Teachers, we have secondary teachers going to other schools. We have primary teachers being moved to secondary schools. We have teachers being moved school to school, even within normal operation. So I don't understand how a Torrance Unified teacher is seen as a child moving to another school, because that wasn't a part of the presentation either.
Forgive me if I'm giving you the wrong information or not answering your question properly, but we had very few cases. In fact, we only had a couple of cases where a TUSD teacher had to move from their own normal school base to another school. So we thought that was pretty good, that we didn't have to have very many teachers having to change their school. In most cases, they were at their school for many, many years. So we, again, put a premium on trying to keep teachers at their own school that they've been for a while. We did have cases where we had students from one school get transferred to another school in order to balance out some numbers. And when you say transfer, correct, we are in distance learning and in that case, virtual learning. So physically, a student is not moving. However, if we do send them to another teacher's classroom in another school, they, for example, if they're a student normally at Arnold, and then they get transferred to a class, let's say, and again, I'm just making up names here, to Anza or to Edison, then they are part of that other school's makeup. That way they are able to get all the communication, all the information, even things like attendance and grades will need to be done by the teacher at the other school. Now, when those occasions do happen, we did still try to give them connectedness and engagement at their neighborhood school. But it is the case where in those students that they're getting emails and notices about assemblies and other information from 2 different schools. So again, we did try to put a premium on keeping students at their own neighborhood school first.
So when this was presented to us, did we not know the technology that couldn't be where it was stated students would stay in their same school, but would be, you know, that schools could share teachers? That technological issue was not brought up in the presentation with us. So when did we find out that that was going to be an issue?
I'm not certain. As far as I know, a teacher can be only assigned to one location and a student can only be assigned to one class at a time. So the exact time when we found that limitation, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we knew that was always a limitation or it was only discovered later on.
I think that gets to the heart of parent concerns that we've read, that, you know, that expectation was set and a lot of confusion occurred after those presentations that were never corrected. So a lot of people were under the assumption that teacher from Anza could teach students at more than one school site, but those students would still remain as a part of their school site. So this is new information and things I think could have been included in an update or a Q&A or, so thank you for
I think
clarifying that.
regardless, Dr. Gerson, of where the kid is, we had, I mean, there is a plan in place and we've got personnel at each of the elementary schools that, because for example, our home-based independent study kids, they are going to be on a roster with the new homeschool teacher, but there's a roster, whether it's formal or informal, there's a roster of kids who belong to a school who may not be attending that school so that they can receive the Zoom, you know, flag salute and the adventures in art, you know, enrichment and the, you know, additional assemblies and, you know, PTA sponsored events. And so we've got a process in place. It's actually through our RTI and I, you know, staff people at each of our elementary school that are kind of going to be tasked with, you know, ensuring that connectivity to their home school. So we do have a plan in place to make sure that regardless of where they may have an enrollment on PowerSchool, you know, a student information system just wasn't designed to have 3 master schedules in it, an AM, a PM, and a distance learning. And so PowerSchool has had, as a company, had to redo, you know, on a dime based on everything that not just Torrance, but all of their clients needed to do. So, and there are limitations to our information system, but that doesn't mean that there's limitations to what we're expecting to how we're going to have kids stay connected to their home schools.
Okay, I just, you know, whether it's a high schooler who has trouble getting AP biology because, you know, we can only offer it in one and not both, or it's the number of combo classes, you know, just in my own personal experience, you know, my wife and I were never excited when we heard combo, but for one of our children, we're like, you know, older kid, do fine, but in the best of times, wouldn't necessarily recommend that for our other child. And, you know, I've never had the privilege of teaching a combo class. Luckily, when I did 2nd grade, it was just a 2nd grade class, but, you know, I don't know how combo works in the worst of times when you have to do fourth grade ELA, fifth grade ELA, fourth grade math, fifth grade math, how you jump back and forth with multiple grade levels in what is the most challenging environment that we've ever had to face in education. So I was trying to figure out when that changed, how it changed. Since it was a technology feasibility issue, I understand that it probably didn't go before the task force, like you don't have a pros and cons list like you had for the rest of us and all that other stuff. So it seems more like a technological limitation as opposed to a decision that we made. Am I categorizing that correctly?
I'm, I'm not so sure, Dr. Gerson. On the technological side, my team did quite a lot of hacking of the student system in order to get the to bend it to our will, and it was difficult, right? You've got sections. You've got one course with 3 sections of an A, a B, and then a distance learning, and then trying to get students paired up, distance learning students paired up with distance learning teachers. So it was quite the puzzle of the century when it came to master scheduling. So I'm not so sure if it was, perhaps there was some technical limitations. Even prior to this, one student, and keep in mind that all this data still goes to the state system, to CalPADS. So we've got that limitation too. A student can only be enrolled in one school. You can't dual enroll a kid between 3 or 4 different schools. However, although they can be enrolled in one school, they can take a class at another school, much like your 8th graders, right? Who'll take a section of algebra or geometry at a high school class. So they're enrolled at their middle school, but then they take a 0-1 period over at the high school. So that's something that we've done before. And that's pretty similar to what we did with some of these students who are enrolled in one school, but then maybe taking a class somewhere else. Or if that was difficult because we needed to balance numbers, they were disenrolled from one campus and then enrolled into another. So yeah, Dr. Gerson, there was some technical challenges, and the team did the best that they could with it.
Okay, so it's also not just a combination of the limitation of the software by student within a school being assigned to a teacher, but also the CBEDS, our numbering system that we have to report students to the state.
Right, because when you send a record up to the state, it has to be associated only to one campus. Otherwise, you get what they call fatal errors, and they don't allow for the submission. So a lot of that still ties it. And even as we go through our submissions this year, it'll be interesting as we send our files up there to see if any of this plays out in terms of number of errors that the state sends back to us, and that's something that my team will have to dig through and figure out. But yeah, we're also beholden to the state system. So all the SISs in California are programmed to be able to extract files and send them up to CalPADS, including PowerSchool, of course. So we can't change that. As much as we worked the master schedules, there are just some things we cannot change. For example, one section will have associated to it not just the students, but also the teacher. And another separate file that is sent is also the credential of the teacher. So that all goes up to the states along with the attendance. So multiple files are sent up there, and everything is cross-matched by the state to ensure that if you're assigning a student to this course and this teacher is teaching that course, does that teacher also have the proper credential assigned for that course? So that all gets cross-matched up at the state also. So quite a lot of moving pieces.
Okay. Continuing on the how we're gonna how distance learning model has been created and continued. Dr. Crumpy, how was the platform design responsibilities distributed out to be able to create this platform?
There were a combination of district resource teachers and classroom teachers that initially, I mean, and they reconstructed it or redesigned themselves a few different ways where they had kind of a grade level emphasis, but they also had a content area emphasis. And then they worked within that to create the platform, to create the different grade level platforms.
What did the timeline for design and testing look like?
They started this probably in, I mean, if I go all the way back to, even before the budget was passed, and we were trying to do more of an independent study type of a distance learning, option for families. Initial survey results, with a smaller group of families, as they started working on the platform. As I said, new rules and things that keeps getting expanded, more people involved. But they worked throughout the summer on the platform. And then started at early August, as soon as we knew what teachers would teach what grade levels, then started the training component of it.
Well, we're talking about the training component. Can you explain a little more what that looked like?
So our elementary teachers were given the opportunity to participate in training ahead of their return to school, on the platform, on engagement, on guided reading, that the resource teachers provided. I think 2 straight weeks of multiple days of training.
Once, not summer training, but once teachers were asked to return, how much time were they given for training on the platform, just for those who returned on their regular return date?
So the training in total, there was 6 hours of training for elementary teachers, 2 hours on the platform, 2 hours on engagement, professional development, 2 hours on a specific component within Pioneer Valley guided reading, virtual or online level book training. So there was 6 hours of training that elementary teachers had.
What did the platform design testing look like when you're in the testing phase of it?
I know that there were some ESY teachers that piloted during ESY to see about some usability. During ESY summer school, we had a few classroom teachers that tested it out and provided feedback. But this all kind of happened in a very tight turnaround when teachers were given their classroom assignments literally days ahead of the first training or the day before the first training. With the schedule that we had to work with, there was a lot that had to be done in a very short amount of time.
Which is a great lead in into my next. So when we got to, with such a short turnaround, the beginning lessons of the platform to students, why were the students not taken through initial lessons of training? And I asked that because at the elementary level, on day one, that very first Monday, students were expected to hit the ground sprinting. All content areas being taught via the platform. So with such a small turnaround time, why were the students not also given lessons specific toward the training of the platform that were specifically designed by the design team didn't produce that kind of lesson? It just seems to me to a rolling increase would have been more efficient. And so I'm just curious why those normal school type lessons didn't seem implemented in this first week of distance learning. And the reason why I ask is I feel like we may have turned off a great many students to the possibilities of distance learning by creating something that was so incredibly challenging from the first day it was introduced, without getting to the challenges of navigating the platform, just the amount of content that was also put on top of it. So I'm curious why that wasn't a consideration in that first design week.
You know, there was a lot to do. I mean, Mrs. Reagan's is going to get mad to me. Did I tell you we're about 3 to 4 weeks behind Mrs. Reagan's of the time to get everything I know she's gonna reach through here and but it's time. You know, we had 6 hours with a classroom teacher on the day that they, you know, we have 2 days when teachers return to school before we start school. And so it was time of getting master schedules done in 3 different ways and matching teachers to classes to, you know, and all our employees are not 12-month employees. And we have very few employees that are full-time employees. It was, you know, it's time, and it is a rolling, you know, learning experience that these are things that have not been done before. We don't have platform developers. These are teachers, and these are teachers who have wholeheartedly put their you know, whole heart and worked 15, 16, 17-hour days, you know, on getting this ready. And you know, they're training today. They went through another training with administrators. They're opening up 6 additional trainings for, you know, elementary teachers. It's going to be, you know, a work in progress as we move forward.
And I would also add that, I mean, the beginning of the school year, I mean, and I think it's been said many times, you know, I mean, we were asked to do, all districts were asked to do a task that no one had ever done before. And, you know, we specifically went with the curriculum that we know, that our teachers know, that is going to be what we feel is the best for our students. And purchasing some outside curriculum, I know there are a number of other districts that did buy some outside stuff, and it crashed on the first day of school. And so I don't think, regardless of the platform or the system, there were going to be bumps along the road. And you know, our work with teachers will be to continue to provide training, to provide support, you know, and make sure that they can work with the students and the parents on utilizing the tools that we have to maximize what their learning experience is this year. And so, you know, I came over here over the summer and would see these teachers, you know, pull in resources and just know that they're working so much to be able to develop something that is consistent with the expectation and the level of quality that we would expect from, you know, our folks here in Torrance.
One of the slides was about re-engagement of students. And this ties back into the presentation. That we should not be the source of the need for re-engagement, which is why I bring it up. And that's why I asked about the timeline. I have no blame on the TOSAs. I know that they were working, and the resource teachers were working and being asked to do a ridiculous job and in a short amount of time. But I also know that, you know, when I was in an elementary school classroom, I didn't necessarily teach, well, I did not teach every content area every day. That was not my mandate. There were social studies days, there were science days, there were PE days specific. And so what I'm trying to get at is, and I'm just gonna ask one more question, that I sympathize with all of those parents who were posting pictures of their children crying. My child as well cried 4 out of 5 days last week and was sick today, and and in this heat was wearing a beanie and covering himself up because he too reacted to it. I think he was reacting to it. I don't think he has a bug. And so I sympathize with those many parents who felt that way. And so my last question is, what are we doing now to make it so that all children will be, as promised, learning on this great platform, learning from our great teachers, that our teachers and our parents aren't going to need to go, thank goodness it's 3:30 now, I can open my bottle of wine. So what are we doing going forward to make this situation better for all of our teachers and all of our families and all of our children?
So on the third day of work, that the distance learning teachers are meeting weekly with the platform, designers, and they meet by grade level, and then they set their priorities for what the main issues are, or the feedback. One of the first things that emerged was printing, and so making sure everyone knows where the PDF is for the resources for printing, making sure schools have something that the printing setup. So that was one piece. The second piece is kind of an itemized what's due agenda, piece that's parents have asked for a checklist of sorts to be able to know what maybe is due each day for the week. And so that will be ready starting next Monday. There's additional people that we talk about repurposing. We've taken 2 people away from other positions, and we've had them work on that. We've got additional tech people that we're putting in place that are going behind the scenes. I think a part of it is also it's ongoing training for our teachers, so that they have they gain an understanding of how everything works as well, so that it becomes more simplified. But I mean, those are just there were 4 or 5 things just from the 1 hour very first PLC that they had, and that of what were the pressing items that they wanted tackled first. And I know I heard through part of the principal PD that they provided this afternoon that there are additional 5 or 6 things in the redevelopment for the second unit that they're already redesigning. So they're taking the feedback. There's been some really good constructive feedback that people have given that they're taking to try to simplify the platform for the second unit and moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions relevant to the learning continuity and attendance plan? Any final words, Dr. Crumpton?
Nope.
Okay. Well, then we will move on from that staff presentation into a public hearing on the adoption of the 2021 Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. And if I can find my piece of paper here, this is a duly noticed public hearing under, Ed Code 42605 on the adoption of 2020-2021 Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. The 2020-2021 Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan will be presented to the Board of Education on September 21st for adoption, as you heard. Any interested persons are afforded an opportunity to be heard, and we have asked for written comments. Have we received any, Dr. Stowe? None in relation to this? Okay, if you do have written comments, please do still send them in and we can take them into consideration. But hearing none at this point, I close the public hearing. Thank you. And we will move on to our next item. Our next item is another public hearing regarding public input pertaining to the draft maps of the district-based boundaries for school board members. Again, I have a reading here. This is a duly noticed public hearing for public input pertaining to the draft maps for district-based boundaries for school board members and the sequence of elections. The district held 2 initial hearings prior to the drafting of potential trustee and election boundaries. Information regarding the previous public hearings and presentations were made available on the district website. This is the first of 2 hearings on the draft maps prior to selection of a final map and sequence of elections. After the selection, the final map and sequence of elections will be forwarded to the Los Angeles County Committee on School District Organization for review. The county committee will hold an additional public hearing, which will be held at a time and location to be determined. Dr. Douglas Johnson, and there he is here, the president of the National Demographics Corporation, has been retained to assist the district with preparing the draft maps and sequence of elections. Dr. Johnson will provide the public with information underlying each of the draft maps. Welcome, Dr. Johnson, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you. And let me share my screen here. So initially, a little bit of background for those who may not have heard the earlier presentations, and then I will get into the maps themselves. I should note, before I get into this, that the draft maps are available on the district's website. If you go under the community link, there's a link to the trustee area mapping process. And full demographic spreadsheets and PDF maps that can be printed out all there, along with a link to a website where you can zoom in and out. I may use during the discussion if we have questions about that, where you can zoom in and out and enter your own address and see the real details of the maps. As you'll see, you get a big picture in the PowerPoint, but not obviously the street by street details. Those are available in the PDFs and on that interactive map. So jumping in, as I just mentioned, we are over halfway through this process now, where tonight is the first hearing on the draft maps. And this is really the chance for the public to be heard and the board to weigh in on any changes to the maps that the board wishes. The schedule is to actually see any revised maps and to choose a map on the 21st. Although if the board's not ready, we can hold additional hearings. It is worth emphasizing as well that this map will be used starting in 2022. So it's too late to put a new map in for this November's election. So as hopefully most people are aware, this November's election will be a traditional district-wide election. This map will be used as a basis with possibly some small changes to accommodate updated updated census data. It'll be used for the November 22 and November 2024 elections. Just briefly reviewing what we talked about in some depth in the earlier hearings. On the left in the district rules slide, you see the federal laws. These are the requirements. So we have to have an essentially equal population in each trustee area. And that is total population, not registered voters or anything like that. Essentially, the rule is the smallest and largest have to be within 10% of each other. So as a rule of thumb and easy understood rule, you have to be within 5% plus or minus of that target number. Then we have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, meaning we can't dilute or divide the voting strength of any, what the law calls a protected class. And here we're really focused on our Latinos and Asian Americans, since those are the 2 larger protected classes. While at the same time, no racial gerrymandering. So race can be one consideration, but it cannot be the primary consideration in choosing a map. So those are the requirements, and all 4 of the maps before you tonight comply with those requirements. Where the discussion and discretion really comes down is in looking at the column on the right, which is traditional principles. And these are goals, they're not requirements. So what you're trying to figure out is how to best balance these goals to meet the needs of your district, your school district, that is. So we're looking at communities of interest, neighborhoods, attendance zones, things like that. We're trying to keep the trustee areas compact and contiguous and to follow easily understood boundaries, really so it's easy for the voters to know which trustee area they're in. One goal, again, not a requirement, but a goal is to respect the voters' choices by avoiding pairing of the current board members so that the voters get to decide which current board members have earned re-election. versus the lines dictating the voters who they can and cannot re-elect if they choose to. And then because we're so late in the decade and we're using old 2010 census numbers as we have to, we're not really looking at planned future growth right now, but that's something that can be looked at when we update the maps next year to take into account the new census data. I mentioned the protected classes. In this map, this is showing Latino CVAP, or Latino Citizens of Voting Age. So that's the data that we use from the Census Bureau that estimates the eligible voter population, in this case of Latinos. So the purple areas, Latinos are less than 25. In the blues, they're 25 to 50. And then the green, yellow, and red areas, there aren't really much in the way of red, but the green and yellow areas are where Latinos are 50 to 75% of the eligible voters. And so really we're talking about in the north, right along the 405 freeway there. So we want to avoid dividing up those areas in a way that dilutes their voting strength. On the next slide, similarly for Asian Americans, obviously the north is very heavily Asian American. And then in the center of the school district, really around Charles Wilson Community Park, for those that know that neighborhood, is another pocket where there's majority Asian American. So those two areas, we want to be sure we don't divide up either one of them in a way that dilutes their voting strength. We don't have to put them together because they are quite a distance apart and there is the population in between them. But for each of those two pockets, we want to try to not divide it in a way that dilutes their voting strength. So just for reference, I also put this map into the city council districts, since those are things folks may be familiar with. We can use them as reference, and you'll see in one of the maps how I tried to use these as a starting point. But obviously there are 6 council districts. There are only 5 school board members. So, and also people may not be aware of this, there are small differences in the boundaries of the city and the boundaries of the school district that also alter the population numbers. So we can't just use their map, but you'll see to the degree possible what a map that tries to match those as much as possible would look like. More often with school districts, obviously, and as following up on your last discussion, people tend to identify with their local neighborhood school, and in particular in a big school district like Torrance, with the high school attendance zones. Again, there are 4 high schools and 5 board members, and the attendance zones are based on the size of the school and the number of students, not on the total population. But you'll see a couple of maps, we did focus heavily on this in 2 different ways. So this is another community of interest that we tried to reflect and respect in the draft maps. So getting into the draft maps, and again, this is not a, you must choose one of these situation. The goal of this hearing tonight is to get public and board feedback on the maps, and we can revise them and bring back revised maps next meeting. So map 101 is the one that really tries to follow the council districts. So you can see in the map, the red dashed lines are your city council districts. And then the colors, the red in the north, the green in the middle, the orange in the south, and then the blue and purple on the left. Those are the proposed trustee areas. So what you end up with is trustee area A in the north. Largely it includes all of council district 1, and then it goes across the freeway and across the council line to pick up the extra population it needs. And so it's council district 1 plus some of council district 3. Trustee area B in the west, the light blue, you can see that is all of council district 2, and then it crosses over and picks up a little bit of council district 3 to get that population number. Then down in the bottom left, trustee area D is all of council district 5, and then it comes over into council district 6. I was trying to minimize how many council districts got divided up, but since 5 doesn't touch 3, it wasn't possible to get it from there. So it does have to push into 6. And that forces E, which is almost all of 6, to then go both north into 3 and east into 4, and that to get population. And we end up with trustee area C, which looks like it's a lot of territory of 3, but as you think back a lot of that territory is unpopulated. Same thing with the north portion of District 4. So C is largely District 4 and then some of District 3. And this shows how, if council districts are a point of reference we want to follow, and that's an open question, then really we end up with kind of slicing up council District 3 and then fairly closely following the others. So going on to 102, map 102, we move away from the council districts and focus more on the attendance zones. And one of the things, when we're looking at attendance zones, one of the things that often comes up from the community and from board members is we don't want board members to bunker in and just care about their own home schools. We want them to feel like they represent multiple schools. And we also want the parent organizations to feel like they have multiple board members that answer to them. Even though obviously each house and each voter can only vote for one board member, a given PTA might have parents who are voters in 2 or even 3 trustee areas. So 102 is going so far as to say, can we have each high school zone have 3 board members, a majority of the board? Because one of the things we always emphasize is it still takes a majority of the board to do anything, to get any policies adopted. So it takes a little bit of creative drawing, as you'll see as I go through this, to get 3 board members into each high school attendance area. And actually up north, for North High School, there wasn't a way to do it without some just ridiculously crazy drawing. So in this map, you can see North High School has trustee areas A and C, the red and green, essentially splitting it. West has most of trustee area B, but a good percentage of population is in trustee area A. And actually that relatively small orange part of West High School around Jefferson is fairly densely populated. So it's a good number of people from, a good number of voters and parents and kids from A, B, and E are all in the West High School zone. Similarly for South, it's mostly D, the purple at the bottom, but you also get a lot of people from trustee area B and a lot of people from trustee area E coming from South High School. So those board members would still feel accountable and responsible for what happens there, in addition to being accountable, as all board members are, for the entire district. Where it takes a little bit of tricky drawing is getting the purple trustee area D into the Torrance High School territory while still getting trustee area E into the South High School trustee area. So that's why the orange one in the middle is kind of a upside down U shape. And that's why D is coming up the way it does. So it's achieving that policy goal of getting 3 board members from each high school zone, except unfortunately for North. But as you can see, that does manage to get us. Torrance has trustee areas C, D, and E, all with significant numbers of population coming from there. So that's going all the way to getting a majority of the board in each attendance zone. 102, map 103 takes a step back. And you can see it's more compact than 102 was. And that's because we're only getting 2 board members in each high school zone. So we still have multiple board members. We still have, multiple board members having accountability there. And for all but one of the trustees in this map, we get multiple high schools that those board members represent. So you get the same division up north between A and C. West, actually, because of population balancing requirements, still ends up with 3. It ends up with the blue B, the orange E, and the red A, all covering parts of West. Torrance now just has C and E covering it. And then South has a lot of trustee area B, and then all of trustee area D. D is the one in this scenario that only represents one high school zone and doesn't stretch into the others. Again, that's making it more compact and kind of, these are the different choices you have. You prefer more compact, or is it better for D to then have that somewhat unusual shape, but to pick up Torrance High School as well? Then the last one, map 104, is taking the opposite approach that we've talked about at the earlier hearings. In this case, trying to consolidate trustee areas, so they really do match up with high school zones, which makes it easy for parents to understand who their trustee is. But then the trustees really have to work to not end up bunkering in their areas. And as you can see, the total population numbers play havoc with this. So up north, you have trustee area A that's entirely in North High School, but there's too many people in North High School for just one trustee area. And so C also comes up there. Same thing in West, trustee area B is entirely there, but so is a chunk of C comes into West. D down in the South does end up as just South, but as you can see, there's a lot of territory and some significant population, although some of that is relatively sparsely populated. But there is significant population in trustee area E as well. And then Torrance ends up split just because of the population balancing requirements. So so this would be a map where we try to match the high schools to the trustee areas as much as we can. One last note, you may have caught him using the letters to describe these, whereas the council districts are numbered. This is at your discretion. We do tend to use letters for schools and numbers for council districts so that when it's election time, if candidates see ads or flyers or signs, it's easy for them to know who they're talking about. If it's Joe Smith for Area C, they know it's a school. If it's Jane Smith for District 1, they know it's a council district thing. So using numbers versus letters is a way to differentiate between the two campaigns at election time. But some folks don't like it, so that is at your discretion. We can always flip that back at the end too. Just going back to this criteria, just to highlight, all 4 maps are population balanced. The deviation has to be between 10%, and all 4 of them are between 3 and 6% off of the ideal. All 4 maps meet the voting age requirements. They essentially all end up with one trustee area that's 23% Latino by citizen voting age population. And they all end up with 2 trustee areas that are 39 to 41% Asian American. And all 4 maps are essentially the same in those respects. All the maps consider neighborhoods and respect communities of interest, but as I've talked about, they do it in very different ways. And then all 4 maps are contiguous, reasonably compact, and use recognizable boundaries. So they're all essentially balanced in those decisions. And the question comes, which one or which revised version of one would work best for Torrance? So that's essentially my presentation. You got the 4 maps here kind of for quick reference for discussion. I am happy to go back to more detailed maps or even to go to the interactive map if you want to see more details or exactly where those lines go. But I'm happy to answer any questions and to talk about revisions. Keep in mind, anything we want to move from one trustee area to another, we need to balance it, unless it's really small. We need to balance it with a similar number of people going back the other way. So I'm happy to talk through any of that as we have the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was a lot of information.
Yes.
I have a question first before I go to Mr. Lee. If a school is misplaced on the map, is that important, Dr. Johnson?
Well, are you talking about South High School?
No, I'm talking about Yukon. You have it south of the 405 and it's north of the 405.
Some of the names, the way the map does the mapping, the little icons is odd. Let me see where about Yukon.
Like on the last one, I especially noticed it.
Yeah, it doesn't, what really matters is where the parents are. Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's just the street index has got the address at the wrong side of the street. So I can adjust that, but it doesn't impact the maps because we're drawing based on where the kids and the parents and the voters are who attend that school, not so much the school site.
Okay, Mr. Lee.
Yeah, a couple of things. First one is when we look at map 103, when I was looking at 103, because it is one of my favorites, is where South High School is it really at the bottom of District B, because South High is on the north side of Pacific Coast Highway?
Right.
And then trustee area D, which basically covers most of that end of the world. It's just South High isn't physically in that district. Can we notch South so that it's in D? There's no population around it. You can probably pick up that shopping center and the high school and just have the lines go on that side of PCH. That way, trustee district D has a physical high school in it. B only has one high school in it. A has a high school in it. C does. Unfortunately, we only have 4 high schools, so E does not. Other than E does have Kurt Cherry High School in it, so if we needed to have high schools, we could put that one in it. That's the only revision on that map that that I really propose. I like both 102 and 103. I prefer 103 in that it's a little more symmetrical, I guess, for a word. In 102, you're kind of using E and then wrapping it around, and then you're pushing D up into what is actually, when you get in close to the map, New Horizons and that whole area, which is a senior citizens community, votes at a very high percentage, but a senior citizen community nonetheless. So there's probably not a lot of kids in that area. So if it was contiguous more with E, like it is in 103, I just like it. The lines just seem to make a little more sense. Certainly for A, C, B, and D, because they've got high schools within them. Unfortunately, D is right across the street from the high school and has Sherry in it. So it's 103 seems to work the best for me, even though 102 works. It just, E gets a little weird in the middle of town. It's got to make that U. I'm not a big fan of 101, and I'm not a big fan of 104. 104 can lead to being a little too parochial, and 101 just mimics the city council districts without really a whole lot of regard to what our universe revolves around, which is really the high schools. So I'm, congratulations. I'd kind of played with these a little myself, and you're far better at this. Obviously, your doctorate works better than my high school education. So, but no, I'm a fan of 102 and 103. And if I had to pick, I'm kind of a fan of 103 because it just lays out a little better for me, with the exception of trying to pick up south and into that D trustee area. But those are my remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Any other board members have
Yes.
any comments?
Yes.
Mrs. Liu?
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson, for what you did here. It's great work. I agree with School Board Member Lee in terms of favoring maps 103 and 102. So let me give you a little bit of the background. There was a recent Court of Appeals case that ruled for Santa Monica, which changed the current law on California Voting Rights Act. Under this law, we would prevail if we went into a lawsuit based on this recent change in the law. But to prove that we do not have racially polarized election in our school district, in our Torrance Unified School District, to prove that would cost significant legal fees. During a pandemic and an economy in recession, I believe we should save our resources for our students, teachers, paraeducators, counselors, therapists, and all the TUSD employees. My main concern with going to district election is that it would increase the likelihood of disunity or fragmentation of the school board. I believe this concern is mitigated with maps 102 and 103, the maps that Mr. Lee also favors. And I favor it because the majority of trustees will represent more than one high school zone. So even though I believe that we would win a lawsuit, a potential lawsuit to divide our district up, I still will vote yes to go to district elections if we adopt either maps 102 or 103. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Liu. Anybody else? Mr. Gerson.
Really, really small question. So I agree with my two colleagues. I like 102 and 103. I really like the concept behind 102, but I was curious why, in attempting, and maybe you can explain why this wouldn't be a possibility, but the east of Hawthorne, I don't know, Hawthorne seems like a major boundary, and there's kind of like an airplane wing that sticks out east on the north end of town. To be able to create a situation where the north area would have 3 different trustees, is it possible to include that section or something similar to make, if 102 became an option that everyone did gravitate toward, that the north end of town would have 3 trustees?
Yeah, I wrestled with that a lot. The challenge is really the way it'd have to work is the blue area B would have to pick up not just the little wing, but it has to be contiguous. So it would have to pick up Magnolia Middle School and the park around there and that whole chunk to kind of wrap around. It's legally questionable to jump over another city's territory, another district's territory to just pick up that wing, unfortunately.
I understand. It makes sense. And in which case, then I absolutely have to agree with Mr. Lee that I think 103 does look like the best option.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gerson. Let's see, Mr. Hahn, did you have any questions, comments? Okay, then I actually preferred 102 or 103 also. In fact, 103 a little preferentially. So as long as we get our maps correct and all the schools in the right places, I'm happy with that. Thank you. So, any further comments?
Oh, sorry, if again,
Yes.
so is there general consensus I should just 103 to come back with the South High School kind of carved out as Trustee Lee mentioned, or I
Can we
come
see
back with
102 and 103 since that was?
So 102 has South High in it.
Oh, okay.
103.
And there were no other everything else was in the right place? Let's put it that way.
In the right area. Yeah, no, I agree with Mr. Lee on that as well.
Yeah, for
Okay.
map 102, if it's, Dr. Gerson just addressed it, but if there's any way to give
Make
another
it third.
trustee to North High School, it'd be great. Yeah. Or for map number 103, to give one more high school to the purple.
Yeah,
But otherwise, all of them all 4 maps address the concerns that we have, and they all have a little not so great thing.
sure.
But otherwise, 102 and 103 really have the least amount of unfairness.
Okay. Yeah, I can take another shot where rather than trying to get 3 trustee area, essentially modifying 103 to get trustee area D to pick up at least a little bit of Torrance or West without ending up with the odd shapes that I did in 102. I can take a look at that and see what I can bring back to you, certainly.
Okay.
So I'll bring back 2 new versions in a 103. One will just have the notch for the high school and no population shifts. And then another version will have some mixing of D and E to try to get D out of just South, if that makes sense. Is that what you're looking for?
That sounds good.
Okay.
All right, anything else, anyone, before we move on? Thank you very much for your remarks and all of that information. I loved playing with the maps and looking at the layers. It's really
great.
fascinating to see how that all works. I want to reiterate to the folks in the audience that are here with us this evening, we don't have a method for you to participate with us at this exact moment, but please do write us and we will see if we can find a way to have you participate and orally give us your comments at our next meeting, which would be the second hearing. So thank you, Dr. Johnson. We have previously requested that comments be emailed to the district, and please do so, continue to do so. I hope that we do get some input. It would be helpful to hear what the community has to say. I hereby close the public hearing, and I want to announce that there will be a second public hearing to be held at the board meeting scheduled for September 21st at 7 p.m. So everyone can join us for that. And oops, and I just lost my mic. Kept my mask on, but I lost my mic. Okay, so everyone can join us for that. And we will move on then to our next item on the agenda, which is our unscheduled hearings for non-agenda items or oral communications. The board does welcome input from the public in order to discuss district business in an orderly manner for the privacy and safety of speakers and to help staff respond more directly. Board policies do require the public presentations to the board comply with certain presentations. This is kind of irrelevant at this point since we can't have any live speakers with us at this moment in time. But we do have, I believe, some written comments that we are going to read. I do want to mention that those written comments will be read to a limit of 3 minutes each. So if you will keep track of that, Mr. Hahn, for us. And at that 3-minute time, we will end that particular comment, but most of them I think will fit in that time period. Complaints against employees or students are normally not heard, or will normally be heard in closed session, I'm sorry, and the district's complaint procedure should be followed before discussion with the board. So that will not be the kind of comment that we will be reading out. The board may remove disruptive individuals and order the room cleared. We are trying to avoid that by limiting our access to our Zoom. So we'll see what we can figure out for next time to allow for live comments. So let's see, Dr. Stowe, what do we have to share with our group this evening?
Thank you, Ms. Reagans. We've got some comments that will be read from Dr. Egan, Dr. Kim, and Dr. Egan, Dr. Kim, and Dr. Liberati. So if you three gentlemen would go in that order, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stowe. Good evening, Mrs. Reagans, members of the board. I have 4 letters here that I'll read, beginning with this first one. Dear Torrance Unified School District, I'm a West High senior concerned about replacing West High's native mascot. I strongly urge West High to adopt a new mascot that doesn't appropriate any cultures, as well as retire any indigenous themed branding. I hope West makes it a top priority to make its school a more welcoming and inclusive environment. I give my full support to replace the Warrior, a student-led initiative, which works to spread awareness and has garnered support from parents, teachers, alumni, and community members. West High's avoidance to address these issues is not only cowardly, but also shows a blatant disrespect towards their native students. It is no longer acceptable to run away from conversations about racism. Changing the mascot will be the jumpstart to making Torrance a better place. It's time to stop wasting funds on W merchandise. The W is no more acceptable than the Warrior head, but funding towards things that matter, like painting over outdated Warrior imagery that plagues the school in nearly every building. It's time for West High to do better. Everyone is watching. Thank you for your consideration, Zoe Kono. The next letter, it might be a little longer. I'll do my best to read it quickly. Dear Jeremy Gerson, James Hahn, Don Lee, Betty Lou, and Terry Reagans. As a community member of Torrance and an alum of West High, I'm urging you all to back the community in replacing the West High mascot. From the Pekin High, and I apologize, there's a former mascot that they reference here that's very derogatory and just going to pass over that, but get the drift here. The Pekin High former mascot to the West High Warriors, using real human beings as props is never okay. Native mascots are especially offensive when you consider the centuries-long legacy of state-sponsored enslavement, theft, and extermination of natives at the hands of Californian settlers. Imagine your ancestors undergoing that brutality only for the direct descendants of the brutalizers to turn around and cherry pick or outright misrepresent parts of your culture to add some flair to their high school. Can this mascot really be considered honorable when it was born from a time of overt racism? Can we really claim we're honoring natives when most of the student body, including me at one point, doesn't even know the names of the original tribal owners of the land this school is built on? While there is little to suggest the mascot has had any positive effects on our students, there is plenty to suggest otherwise. A June 8th, 2020 paper published in the Race, Ethnicity, and Education Journal reviewed over 60 studies and found that Native mascots across the board resulted in lower self-esteem, lower community worth, less capacity to generate achievement-related possible selves in Indigenous students. These are real negative impacts to the psyche that could only occur as a result of folks viewing natives through a stereotype lens, relegated to ancient history like the Spartans, and not thriving, productive human beings. That's not even mentioning the mascot's effects on the student body as a whole. I'm not sure of how familiar the board is with this, but it's an open secret among West students and staff that West is where school spirit comes to die. How can you have pride in a mascot that disrespectfully caricatures or a marginalized group of people? How can you celebrate our school when nearly every activity from the yearbook's chieftain title to color guard costumes appropriates Native culture? How can you proudly claim being part of a school that condones this behavior? Frankly, there are plenty of far superior alternatives to the warrior mascot. We would like to take the path of Fairview Park School District, who decided in 2019 to keep the warrior name, but change the mascot image to a Trojan-inspired figure. Or we could just throw it out altogether. My hat's in the ring for West High Wizards. Given how over 3,000 individuals, or 150% of the school population, signed on to a petition to replace the mascot, there's no shortage of hands willing to help the campus rebrand. I certainly know I would. Thank you for your time, Sunny Zhao. This next letter I'll read, I'm going to read on behalf of 8 individuals who submitted the exact same letter independently of one another, but it's the same letter. Dear Torrance Unified School District, I'm a community member of Torrance concerned about replacing West High's native mascot. It is appropriative of Indigenous culture and promotes harmful stereotypes that have huge negative impacts on negative youth. I strongly urge West High to adopt a new mascot that doesn't appropriate any cultures, as well as retire any Indigenous themed branding. I hope West makes it a top priority to make its school a more welcoming and inclusive environment. I give my full support to replace the Warrior, a student-led initiative which works to spread awareness and has garnered support from parents, teachers, alumni, and community members. The sweeping movement for racial justice, which has been amplified internationally over these last few months, has made it clear that we must change the injustices in our society and strive towards equal opportunities and representation. This letter is submitted by Shannon Cleo Daniels, Annika Fontania, Kennedy Jew, Jasmine Tran, Haley Shaw, Isabella Mendoza, Joanna Liu, and Brian Ishigo. One more, which is on a different topic. Dear Torrance Unified School District, my name is Sohei Butt, and I am a student that attends North High School, and I'm concerned about the requirement of all high school students to undergo the English and math diagnostic tests. Teachers and staff members, due to the circumstances, have more responsibilities and a greater risk in delivering educational content to their students, and we find these state tests to be unnecessary and improper to conduct at this time. Our esteemed English and math teachers especially are overwhelmed right now, figuring out how to deliver content effectively and in a timely manner. AP English and math teachers must use the time allotted in a period to prepare their students for College Board's annual AP exams. Taking time out of their already difficult schedule to teach students how to take the diagnostic tests, as well as a day for us to take the tests, is utterly absurd. Additionally, these diagnostic tests are not in any way, shape, or form a method of measuring a student's intelligence in a particular subject. We see them as only formalities and a complete waste of time, and do not feel it wise for TUSD to administer these tests to our already struggling students and force teachers to oversee them. There are also students who are low income and cannot afford the technology needed to take these tests, making their lives more difficult in a state ravaged by the pandemic. Although these students may have the option of going to school and picking up a Chromebook to take these tests, this is unsafe and students should stay home to stay safe and to focus on their coursework. I'm a senior and I have responsibilities and duties that I must manage too, and feel that these tests aren't helpful in taking time out of my classes. The purpose of a class period is for students to learn and to prepare for AP exams. Both of my English and math classes are in fact AP classes, and I would 100% much rather devote my time in learning the content needed to pass the AP exam. These assessments do not assess everything that we have learned, and there is nothing that the district has to measure our assessment scores against. We missed an entire semester due to the pandemic, and it is not reasonable to administer these exams without information to measure our scores against. And even if there was, administering these exams during such an auspicious time is pointless. Please take my words into consideration, as everyone in the country and state is struggling with schooling at this very moment. These diagnostics tests make life for everyone even more difficult than before. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me back at my personal at Sohaib. I don't need to read this part, do I? Thank you for your time, Sohaib Butt. And that is the final letter that I have to read.
Next, I have 2 letters to read into the record. The first letter begins, Dr. Stowe, I am writing today to let you know of my disappointment with the district's decision to choose the Surface Pro for teacher use in the classroom. There are several challenges to this device. First, the device is small, which makes it challenging to use from a laptop perspective. The keyboard is not user-friendly because of its size. The monitor size is especially important this year when I'm trying to see my entire class on the screen during Zoom meetings. As someone who wears glasses, I have trouble reading the screen even with my glasses on. Secondly, the device is built more like a tablet with a keyboard attachment. The keyboard attachment is not secure, causing possible separation, which in turn can cause breakage. The keyboard, while magnetic, can detach independently of the user choosing to remove it. Also, since this device is more like a tablet, it should be covered with screen glass and a protective case, neither of which was provided by the district. Many of my peers have chosen to use their personal computers instead of or in addition to the Surface Pro. Others have chosen to purchase with their own money the protective coverings the district should have provided to us. This shows how the Surface Pro is not meeting the needs of all teachers, while highlighting the fact that the district should provide the tools we need to be successful in the classroom, virtual or physical. Last Friday, when moving the Surface Pro around on my desk to make room to project work from the document camera, my Surface Pro detached from the keyboard and the device fell off my desk, landing on the edge of the device face down. As you can see from the attached photos, the device is now inoperable. I know of one other person on my campus who has also had the same problem, but with a smaller crack. While the device may be versatile, I don't feel it meets the needs of all teachers. I also do not understand why the district did not provide us with the materials to prevent damage to the device. If it is due to the cost, the district should have included that in the pricing of the devices. If it was not a viable option, the district should have chosen other devices. After reaching out to Gil Mara, he informed me that there are no more Surface Pros and the accidental damage is not covered under warranty. I instead will be receiving a 5-year-old Dell computer until the next technology swap. I am disappointed to hear this. As a teacher who has embraced and regularly integrated the use of technology, I feel like I will be taking a step backwards in my ability to continue to grow as a teacher. I also worry that this device will not be supported by the district and that it may also become unstable. I urge you to consider providing teachers with better keyboards or protective equipment for their Surface Pros. I also implore you to have a plan in place because if this has happened to 2 teachers at my campus with a Thank you. The next letter begins, Hi, we have a kindergarten student. From our experience, Zoom learning is doing students a huge disservice. For kindergartners specifically, how do you equate 2.5 hours of online learning to a normal full day of in-person learning? This is inherently going to put kids behind standardized levels of education. What is the plan for next school year when you have kids entering the next grade having had a lower level of education? Are the levels of standardized education going to be modified? Will there be placement tests in order to move on to the next grade? There is going to be significant impact to the overall learning of every kid. So please explain how this is going to be addressed in the long term. I believe a much greater risk that our education system will be faced with in the future than the risk currently presented. Please explain what is being done to fight for the students of Torrance in order to get them back in the classroom. How has the leadership of this board positively impacted our students? Please describe to us what steps you have taken to put our students first. What was the teachers' union vote to return to school? Given that this information has not been released and the majority of families want their kids back in school, it is apparent that teachers are being put first, not our kids. Christy and Travis Rice. Thank you. That concludes my two.
Okay. And that's it for those comments, Dr. Stowe?
I have.
Oh, Mario. Okay, Dr. Liberati.
Thank you, President Reagans. I have 3 letters to read that were submitted to us to read during this public comments portion, and I'll read them into the record. Starting with the first letter that's dated September 3rd. Dear board members, the directive that I received on August 28th in the late afternoon demanding all non-teaching credentialed employees to return to school was unfair. There was no clear valid reason for the demand to return either. It discriminates against one set of employees. Every employee should have the same right to work from home along with teachers. The demand sets an unnecessary health and safety risk. Since the school's closure on March 13, 2020, non-teaching employees have shown that they can perform their duties virtually and very effectively. In case some people from the district do not fully know a counselor's role, we do not assess. We provide academic and social emotional support. The district is changing the intent of the MOU. Health and safety should be the top priority, and with this demand, it goes against that intent. The district has changed the rules in the middle of the game. The directive came without warning or consultation. It is divisive and shatters confidence and trust between TUSD and staff. As a unit in solidarity with our colleagues, we demand that TUSD rescind the directive, and principals should be given the authority to determine, in consultation with their staff and TTA representation, the safest way to meet the needs of the school. Also, TUSD should honor the intent of the MOU's negotiation this summer, and the TUSD must make the health and safety of their employees the top priority in all of their decisions. Thank you. Nicole Kruger, Counselor, Burt Lynn Middle School. Second letter received, same objective, dated September 7th. Dear school board members, on the morning of September 1st, I received an email that a statement was made by the district that all non-teaching credentialed employees needed to return to campus. This included counselors. The statement is unfair, unnecessary, unjust, and came with no warning or consultation. The directive is a provocation on the part of TUSD and is a distortion of the intent of the MOU that was duly negotiated this summer. Furthermore, at no time during the summer did the school board reopen schools and give any expectation that certificated non-management staff would be mandated to be present at the school site prior to return of our students and teachers. There was no clear or valid reason for the demand of counselors to return either. This discriminates against one set of employees. The same email also stated that TUSD would be allowing students that needed to complete START special education testing to come on campus to do so, and that would require all necessary special education team members to report back to the campus at that time. In case some district personnel are not fully aware of a counselor's role, we do not assess nor do we have anything to do with special education testing. So we counselors would not be necessary. We provide academic and social emotional support. Counselors should have the same right to work remotely along with teachers. Our job is all being done virtually. so there is no need to put our health and safety at risk unnecessarily. The demand sets an unnecessary health and safe risk. Since the school's closure on March 13th, 2020, counselors have shown that they can perform their duties remotely. The district has changed the intent of the MOU. Health and safety of the employees and students should be top priority, and with this demand, it goes against that intent. This directive is divisive and shatters the confidence and trust between TUSD and staff. As a unit, in solidarity with our colleagues, we demand that TUSD rescind this directive and principals given to go ahead with collaboration and consultation with their staff and TTA representation, with accommodations if need be, the safest way to meet the needs of their own school. Also, TUSD should honor the intent of the MOUs negotiated this summer. TUSD must make the health and safety of their employees the top priority in all their decisions. In my 23 years of education, having been both a teacher and a counselor, I have never felt a blind side by the district. My health and safety and the health and safety of my young children, as I am a mom first and foremost, just as many of you are parents first and foremost, are my top priority. Putting myself and my family at risk, as my children and all students in Los Angeles County are at home doing virtual learning, as it is not deemed safe for students to be on campus.
Time.
I have one more letter. It's very similar to the second one. Happy to read, but it's almost identical. What's the board's pleasure? It was written, this last one, let me state, it was written by Andrea Rice, elementary school counselor. And the third one is written by Cam Ann Navarro, dated today, 7:53 a.m. Good morning. My name is Cam Ann Navarro, and I am a counselor at North High School. As you may have heard, non-teaching certificated staff have been told by their principals that they must work on campus as opposed to working from home while students are learning virtually. Many affected student staff members cannot understand why the district would unnecessarily put our health at risk. The district is putting non-teaching certificated staff at risk for contracting the virus when the students are not even on campus. We are already going to have a face risks with students return to campus. Why take those unnecessary risks now? Furthermore, if a staff member contracts the virus now, it may affect their ability to return to campus when students return. We demonstrated in the spring that we are successfully performing the essential functions of our job from home. I cannot think of any one of my current job duties that cannot be performed from home while students are not on campus. In my opinion, there is no compelling reason that warrants this mandate, given the risks that come with working on campus. I ask that the district allow us to use our professional judgment of when to work on campus and when to minimize the risks. I have many questions about this mandate. What are the essential job duties that the district believes cannot be performed from home? Is the district prepared to fill in staffing needs in the case that numerous non-teaching certificated staff members are faced with no other option other than to request a leave of absence? Third question, how will these leaves of absence affect the workload of others at those sites and affect the quality of service to the students and parents? The district claims that the MOU signed do not include a provision of non-teaching members to work from home. The MOUs include language that supports reasonable accommodations. Working from home is a reasonable accommodation if the essential functions of the job can be performed from home. I have surveyed counselors in 8 other local districts, and all of them are being allowed to work from home and work on the campus when they feel it necessary. TUSD is the only district in the area that I'm aware of that is requiring counselors to work on campus. I hope that you can appreciate our position on this matter, and I ask that you consider rescinding this mandate. Thank you for your time and consideration. Cam Ann Navarro, counselor at North High School. Thank you, President Reagan. That's the third letter.
Okay, now that's it, right, Dr. Staff? That's the end of that, okay? Thank you. And that's a sampling of the kinds of, I've received other letters about that, and I think the other board members have too. And we are concerned about the issues that you have raised. So that's it for our oral communications or unscheduled hearings. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda, which is the discussion action items. I don't believe we have any comments from the public about any of the items, so I'm not going to read the instructions. Again, if you do have comments to make, please do write to us, write to the superintendent at TUSD.org, and let us know, and we will take it into deliberation. So the first item is 11.2, start of school, 2020-21 update. As a discussion only action item, not an action item, sorry, I misspoke. And we'll let Dr. Stowe lead us in that.
Thank you, Ms. Reagans. Mr. Mara, if you could share the screen. So it goes without saying that this year was a start like no other. And there's been comment tonight as to some of the challenges, and we certainly acknowledge that. But, you know, throughout the summer, we had multiple sessions. We had members of our community all coming together to really determine how we were going to open schools. Information was changing daily based on health updates from the Department of Public Health. And when we look back on it, it really seems like it was a blur. We knew students were returning on August 26th, whether it be on campus or online. We had multiple Zoom meetings here. We had updates with parent groups, with our staff. And we had the task force that we've talked about quite a bit here. There really is no way to quantify the work that everybody put into the planning and preparation. And it was teachers and staff, administrators, board members, parents, and other members of the community that really came together and played a significant role to have us bring students back to school successfully. All things considered, it was a very smooth start. Are there bumps? Absolutely. But while working together, we'll ensure that our students have a rich, rewarding learning experience this year. And I would really like to thank everyone within TUSD for making that happen. It was special to be part of it and continue to be part of it, because we will continue to revise and modify and improve all of our processes. I'd like to thank the parents and community for their trust and support as we work through this process. We are on day 9 of the school year, and even under the best of circumstances when school is in person, we're still working through schedule changes and modifications at this point in the game. We are committed to our students and encourage parents to continue to work with teachers, with principals, as well as district staff to assist when issues arise and let us know when things are going right. I had the opportunity to visit about half of our schools so far this year, and a number of classrooms where I saw firsthand, you know, the work that teachers are doing. And in their classrooms, many of them are teaching online from campus. You know, principals are there, and just it's tremendous work, and really a lot of credit goes out to a lot of different people. But tonight, the presentation is more about looking forward. And as the LA County Department of Public Health reports decreasing numbers of infections, we are now looking forward to bringing students back on campus for specific purposes. Tonight, we'll present to the board some of the things that will be allowed under the Department of Public Health guidelines. Remember, on August 17th, the board passed a resolution allowing some activities on campus pending DPH orders and following protocols. And then tonight, we're going to outline our plans for programs in athletics, youth sports, adult education, special education, and others for English learners. And we are happy to take board questions during or at the end of this presentation. Dr. Egan will present information to the board about the return of some of our high school students for athletics and extracurriculars. We will be bringing this back at our September 21st meeting for approval by the board, depending on or pending DPH numbers. Dr. Butler will also present tonight on youth sports and adult education. And finally, Dr. Crumpy on some of our educational programs. So at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Egan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stowe. Good evening again, Mr. Dragons, members of the board, community. I want to just begin by reminding the board and our community that our athletic program functions under the guidance of CIF, who's modified our athletic competition schedule several weeks back and will not be allowing any competition in any sport until the month of December at the soonest. So our plan being discussed this evening is strictly to begin the activities associated with conditioning and other allowable practice activities. Based on recent authorization, as Dr. Stowe mentioned, from LA County Department of Public Health, we're planning for a return of students to TUSD campuses potentially to participate in the allowable athletic and conditioning and other similar extracurricular program exercise and practice. Using this specific guidance from the Department of Public Health, CIF, the NFHS, district and school personnel are already collaborating on returning to these activities while adhering to all of the appropriate criteria. Each school site will be completing their own reopening protocol for youth sports to provide us with the assurance that all proper measures have been put in place. Additionally, each school site will submit a detailed written plan for review by Dr. Butler and myself and other members of cabinet. Prior to participation, as is normal, students and parents will have to submit all required paperwork, as well as a daily screening that students will have to participate in prior to entering campus. Next slide, please. All coaches and staff will complete the same daily screening as we are currently requiring of all TUSD employees who physically return to their workspace on a daily basis. Staff will be present at the entrances to campuses to complete the screening process of all students prior to their entry. All potential positive COVID exposure responses will be reported directly and the individual will not be allowed entry. In addition to coaches supervising practices, additional staff will be present to visibly monitor activities and will report any irregularities to the supervising administrator or principal. Violation of the Department of Public Health orders will be taken very seriously and may result in cancellation of future activities for a particular group or cohort. Next slide, please. In addition to an overall school plan for activities, each team and extracurricular program that participates will be required to submit their own written plan to their principal for review. Coaches and extracurricular program staff will utilize a template developed by district and site administrators, along with athletic directors to ensure that the continuity of planning across teams and groups exists. Next slide. So this is just a rough outline of the timing. We've started with some of the planning meetings with administrators and athletic directors over the past couple of weeks, and we'll continue throughout the month of September and early October. Site administrators have held at least one initial coaches meeting in the past week to just begin the collaboration and to begin the information sharing process, knowing that those folks are key people to the development of some of the very specific planning that we've got in store for them. Following tonight's board presentation and pending any specific direction from the board, TUSD and sites will continue to collaborate and plan, as well as beginning sharing information with parents and students as appropriate. We hope to have the board further review and guide the process at our next meeting on September 21st. Then after finalizing all of the site level plans, we would look toward a potential start of practices on the beginning of that following week, which could be as early as September 28th. Next slide, please. So in terms of communication, you can see there's, this is embedded within the timeline that was roughly sketched on the previous slide. But essentially, this gives some perspective on the ways in which we're specifically planning to keep people informed, at the school level in particular. Additionally, as part of the preparation for these activities, all coaches and staff are going to be required to participate in formal training Head coaches and other program lead staff will be expected to participate in monthly meetings with their site administration. And with that, I know we're shifting gears into youth sports with Dr. Butler. So I'll go ahead and turn it over.
Can I ask a quick question before we move on?
Absolutely.
Dr. Egan, do all of those things apply to all sports for the kids? Or are there specific sports that will be the focus and the preference?
At this time, we're allowing this to be inclusive of all sports that would be allowed this school year, which at this point currently CIF has an allowance in place with some guidelines for the specific conditioning and even some level of practice, in some cases even with equipment, specific sports related training to that sport for all sports.
Okay, thank you.
President Reagan, I have a couple of questions.
Of course.
Dr. Egan, I see that you're using the youth sports guidance as the permission from DPH, which is different than the reopening protocol for K-12 schools document that we have specifically received.
Mhm.
I'm concerned that our order specifically on reopening protocol for K-12 schools does not in any way address opening schools or outside of that 10% under the three categories, of students receiving IEP services, students receiving EL services, and the new openness that Dr. Ferrer has expressed about how it was written, that how we define students of need, of extra need to match that 10% at most on school campuses. Where does the youth sports guidance fall into that as far as something that we can operate under?
Actually, I can take that one if you don't mind.
Sure. Go ahead, Dr. Butler.
Sure, thank you, and good evening, everyone. This was actually a set of protocols. Youth and community sports was its own set of protocols that actually even came out before the learning loss mitigation protocols, cohorting that you're talking about there that Dr. Crumpy will go into a little bit later. So this was its own niche, if you will, that was carved out by DPH to allow for, important to note, this is just for practice and conditioning. Nothing to do with an organized sport game or match. And of course, with all social distancing, with being careful about not reusing equipment without properly disinfecting it unless it's just between two people that continue to use it together that way. So it is its own set of guidelines written specifically for this by DPH. In fact, we were a little taken aback when these came out because it just mentioned community sports. And again, youth community sports, nothing with adults here. Youth practice is the best way of saying it. So when they came out, there was nothing mentioned about district sports. And it actually took us a couple of interactions with both DPH and with LACO as well, LA County Office of Education, to make sure that this is okay for district sports practices as well. But it is under these same guidelines. And again, the main reason for the difference that you'll see here, this is all outdoors, keeping individuals far apart. And you'll notice obviously that the instructions that we have for cohorting and bringing back for learning loss mitigation is assuming indoor learning activities. So that was the question. Were there other questions, or do you want to go
That
ahead?
was my question, to make sure that the youth sports guidance still is available to us, which you said you specifically did hear from DPH that we do have the authority to act on that guidance.
Yeah, if you read the last version, and obviously no one's reading these as closely as cabinet certainly is as we're trying to put all these together, but they did add just a particular little phrase that then brought it into district sports. We finally got it in writing, yes.
Great, thank you.
Of course. So continuing on with youth and community sports, I already gave you the context for it. Important to note that the city of Torrance has already reopened for some community sports practices. In fact, I was talking with Mr. Huang and Mr. Jones on Friday. We were actually talking about crossing guards going forward, because obviously that's changing a little bit here. But I did bring this up and just verified with them. They've opened up for specifically for Little League practices and a few others. In fact, they've been approached by North Torrance Little League to hopefully practice with the city. And I let them know of where we were going with this board meeting tonight and ideally getting moving forward, if things go well, end of September, early October, to open our fields for sports practices as well. So we're all making sure to talk together. In fact, they're the ones that provided a really good liability waiver for participants that was vetted through their city attorney. And it's likely we will use that or a very similar version of that as well. So that does bring into account the fact that not only do we reopen, but we need to have liability waivers in place. We need to have waivers from the organizations in place specific for COVID-19. And I guess fortunately or unfortunately, there are plenty of examples out there from law firms in California that have put these together for school districts just because it is a need right now. So we'll be finalizing the forms and the processes and the guidance the same way that you heard for our district sports. We're all going through the same kind of situation here. We're going to communicate about that reopening and coordinate the permit requests. So just as a matter of process, and this would be the way that we would do permit requests at any time of year in a normal year, we take care of the district sports needs, district room needs first, obviously, and then we will schedule in youth practices around that. And one of the things that we'll be looking at is, will there be the need for additional facility charges to pay for monitoring and cleaning between the individual practices? No decision made on that yet, but of course we're mindful for any additional district labor that needs to go into this. We want to make sure to get fair value for that for our employees as well. Next slide, if we may, please. Or I'm sorry, I should stop there. Any questions on the youth sports, community sports? Okay, hearing nothing there, then we'll move on to adult education. We're fortunate to have Dr. DiUlio and Ms. Takamine here as well. If you have specific questions for them, I'm here to present just the overall context and obviously answer DPH things overall that we're working with. But if you have specific questions for them, they are available as well here. So we are now allowed, or actually this was even again before the cohorting kind of guidance that you're hearing about. There was protocol in place to allow for in-person instruction for jobs in essential fields. So what we're talking about here is just those two programs, medical assistant and pharmacy technician, that have completed all of their online work. They've gone as far as they can with that. The last piece that they need, about 70 students total, is face-to-face lab instruction. So then they are prepared to go out and do their internships in the community as they gain some practicum in the field. And at the end of that program, then of course, they're ready to become workers in essential fields that we do need right now. So I've got to give credit to Adult Ed. They came forward right away and said, how do we get these folks finished up? And so we spent a little bit of time talking about which protocol is best for them, and really read them, went back and forth. And it seems that the higher education protocol, which you see attached to this board item, is much more appropriate for the work of adult ed, with the one exception of student housing. Obviously, we don't provide student housing. So that part of it is not being answered in their work that they did. But the rest of it is very much geared towards adult learners coming back into the environment, and thus you can see their entire protocol that they put together for that. And with that, I'd say we are available if you have any questions at all for either for them or for myself around adult education.
I'm just curious as to the practicum locations are still there and available and offering to do the training of students?
I asked the same question, and actually this is great. I asked it about a couple of weeks ago. Maybe Dr. DiUlio or Ms. Takamine, would you like to give an update on that?
Sure.
Go ahead, Dr. D.
Oh, thank you. Yes, the facilities are available. We're preparing the facilities so that in fact they would meet all of the DPH guidelines and to keep staff safe and student safe. So working with Dr. Butler and going over the document, we've gone back and forth in terms of reviewing protocol. There's 5 main components of the protocol: teacher safety, student safety, physical distancing, infectious control, and then lastly and finally, to ensure equitable access for everyone. Through that, there's massive communication with a compliance task force and an exposure management plan that is attached to it.
And will we be supplying the PPEs, or will the facility?
We have those and we will be supplying them.
That's a great question, though. We will be taking care of the students, obviously, when they're doing the lab work here. And we have a commitment to our students to finish their program. So if they need something as they move on to the practicum, we'll take care of it. But I would find it unusual if the practicum sites were not providing. I'm sure that they have their standards that they would like us to follow. But great question, and we'll make sure to iron out any differences there.
Just in addition to that, the practicum sites, they are in great need of our students for their externships. In fact, they've already taken 5 and offered to complete the lab work for those students so that they can get them in.
Wow, pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from board members? No?
Thank you. Moving on then to Dr. Crumpy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you may have heard a few weeks ago that the governor released guidance and that we could open up our schools to some students in certain situations. The LA County Department of Public Health has recently come out with their guidance as expected, a little bit more restrictive than the governor or the California Department of Health guidance. And so the LA County Department of Health has permitted schools to reopen beginning on Monday, September 14th, for students needing assessments for IEPs, or for, needing assessments, students with IEPs or English learner students. There can be no more than 12 students and 2 supervising adults within any group of students that are going to be coming to school to receive services. No more than 10% of a total school enrollment can be on campus at any one time. By the way, that excludes any YMCA childcare. That's a separate requirement, and they don't count in those numbers. And then there is a strict cohort design where we're not cross mixing students. So once we would put students in a group, that that's their group, and that's the group of adults that would work with them. Next slide. So for assessments, and this is of particular need, we literally had hundreds of initial assessments and triennial assessments that were in the process of being conducted when we had to close on March 13th. And we received guidance that, all timelines for assessments were suspended. So now that suspension is lifted, and we have, hundreds, in fact, over 500 in total. At least half of those are speech only, but then kind of evenly divided up with initial assessments, both those in process versus signed assessments that had not yet started, and then triennial assessments. Also in-person initial LPAC results. While they're working on virtual assessments, and there is a virtual annual assessment that is being worked on by EPS, an in-person initial assessment has not yet been determined, and then there is a in-person portion for that. Next slide. So that assessments are our highest priority and highest need to get that backlog of students the services that they need. The next piece is in collaboration with our special education planning teams, our site leadership, to have a very cautious phased approach where we're identifying students to come in and receive their services that they cannot access via distance learning on an intensive needs level. So these are our most involved students that are not able to access their services via a computer. And finally, next slide, Gil. Specialized supports. And so in this case, there's English learners and possible DIS supports for special education students who are primarily assigned to general education teachers. This is our third in our phased approach of our need, where students could come to school to receive intervention or DIS services, not their classroom instruction, although still in the planning stages based on feedback we get this evening. We are hearing a lot of need possibly for some supervision and support of our students during their learning. This group of students in particular that are really having trouble accessing learning, that we could provide them with some safe supervision at school sites. And next slide. So our tentative timeline is a little bit slower than what the state or the LA County Department of Public Health is recommending. We want to start, ensuring our offices are set up for assessments. We were actually planning on this, and so some of our committees were working on this in the summer ahead of us being closed down. But we were going to be there was initial plans and initial permittability prior to the July shutdown for us to be able to start this ahead of the start of the school. We actually had a plan in place that would allow us to kind of wipe out half of our backlog prior to the start of school, so we weren't pulling kids out of school to do their initial or their assessments. Then the governor closing us down kind of stalled that. So while we do have the beginning of this design, we want to start tomorrow and start talking about where those spaces are and what PPE is needed in those locations. And then starting next week, starting to begin those schedules, communicating with our staff, communicating with our families, so that we can get a schedule in place for these one-on-one, assessments. And then with again, a tentative timeline to start the week of September 21st. Of course, not all students are coming in on September 21st. This is going to be a work in progress, but we would start with some of our backlogs on September 21st. And then we would start kind of the next phase, which is a similar thing, starting to looking at those most severe students that are in our self-contained classrooms, and how do we bring them back into what size of cohorts, what kind of support do they need. By the way, the 12-to-2 ratio, and LA County Department of Health put this, made this quite clear from the get-go. We received California clarification over the weekend that 12-to-2 ratio is a maximum number of student count and a total number of people count. So 12-to-2, that's 14 people. But if we were to need, say, 2 more adults in that cohort, then we would reduce that number to 10 kids. So it's any addition factor up to 14, as long as the number of students don't go above 12. So starting towards the end of September, we would then start, working on that small cohort. What kind of services do they need? How would we safely manage that, with a tentative start date of October 5th. And then I didn't include it, but then from there, we move forward with that third phase, which would be our English learner any additional special ed students receiving additional intervention supports on our school sites that would start at least the week after that, if not 2 weeks after that. That is it.
Mr. Hahn has a question.
Just a quick comment. Thank you so much, Dr. Comfrey. Quick question on the small cohort. Why is it taking a month to get that up and going?
Well, it's tentative, and it may not, but the plans that we had in place with a guidance ahead of time, this changes what we were doing a little bit. So we want to make sure that we're communicating with our staff members, and we're making sure that our staff are ready and have time to come back ahead of them so that they can ready the space and prepare for the students. So really what we're kind of trying to do, I know that, you know, there had been an agreement to allow at least 5 days of that turnaround time. We're trying to kind of double that because and provide, you know, enough time to make sure that we have the staffing in place. And really this communication with parents and organizing the extreme, you know, services. Part of this is even looking at caseloads and whether anything has to be adjusted. I don't know that it does, but some of the guidance that we're still reviewing and looking for a couple of nuances. We're hoping that we have a couple questions even answered this Thursday when we have our weekly briefing, because this guidance just came out. So we're still looking for some clarification that you can have the adult in the class, but any DIS services of an adult coming in and having to remove a kid to get additional support has to happen one at a time. And so just looking at a cohort's, you know, of 12 students as IEPs, and then see what services that they all need. We think to do it the right way requires some additional work and communication between the parents and the staff.
Okay, thank you. The reason I'm asking is because I feel like this is going to be a template when we decided to reopen the schools too. I just want to make sure we don't have a month turnaround when we get permission to open up and we got to wait a month to say we're ready to go.
Right. And I think because
that probably is realistic.
We've got that plan ready to go. Like that is I'm going to say simpler, but we have that plan, you know, ready to go. Now, it is true when I go back to the English learners, that really could be something much simpler, that we can move that timeline up. That includes a different group of kids and parents and staff, that we may be able to do both of those things in parallel tracks because they involve, you know, different departments.
So one final comment then. So it's 10% of the school enrollment. So we can have 10% at every school, right? It's every school.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And what we still are looking for clarification, and I want to just spend just a quick second, really, really good questions, Mr. Hahn, is I am disappointed, and I think I shared this with Betty last Friday, is that we have homeless and foster kids that are in great need of support. They need a safe place with reliable connectivity. Even with our giving the device and a hotspot, and, you know, and we really were hoping that, because it's permitted in the California guidance, that we could create a safe space with supervision. Remember, we've got this repurposing of staff that we you know have, and we also in the plan that hopefully you approve on September 21st, there is funding for supervision and support for these kids. This seemed a little simpler to put, you know, an employee in a room with 12 kids, that they would then form their own kind of pod, if you will, and allow them a safe place to have connectivity. I think that was actually the simplest. We could put that in place on the 14th, and then LA County decided to take a slower approach, and they eliminated that subgroup from the guidance and only are permitting English learners or special ed, you know, students.
That's not correct, okay, Dr. Crumpy, because in our meeting on Friday, she basically said there is broadness in terms of what we would consider severely needed kids. Her point was, because someone specifically asked, second graders or first graders, they're really severely needed. And she said, well, in the language of the order, there is broadness. So like you're just suggesting, where you can have, like you said, based on 10% up to 12, she's like, we purposely made it broad so that it can go beyond English secondary learners, so on and so on. So there is that room based upon the discussion on Friday for exactly that.
Well, then I want to modify my
needed,
presentation, and I want to add a slide that I'm just going to talk through that has what I just talked about.
Yeah.
Dr. Farrar had a family emergency, and so we actually had somebody else that
that was Wednesday. Dr. Gilchrist did on Wednesday.
And Thursday morning.
Yeah.
And so we had a Wednesday afternoon and a Thursday morning with him. And that was not
yes, I hear you.
Here. So that actually, so I'm going to modify my presentation to say we would also like to provide a safe space for our neediest kids, up to 12. And when you asked about the 10% per school, because one of the things that we're hoping to get clarification on is, that's in total. So if we were going to bring back 10% of a very small elementary school and then receive permissibility to bring back some of our foster homeless kids and oh shoot, we're full. We wanted to kind of leave room. So so that we will re-verify that, because we have a need. I don't know that we have a need at every single school, but we did have one principal saying, can I just put an easy up in the parking lot where there's shade? So that, and like, we can do better than that. And so that is something that that I would like to kind of in arrears add to the presentation that I had to take down off of the slide when I heard the presentation of that guidance. So I'm glad to hear that. And we'll verify and confirm all of it. And then if with everybody's vetting, move forward with that as well.
Yeah,
and if I can add, we have another conference call on Thursday morning with the staff from all of the 80 districts in LA County, and we'll reach out and pose that question. So thank you for pointing that out. But as far as also the question for, why is it taking a month? So Dr. Kim and I met with all of the elementary school principals today, and a lot of the questions, we went over this information, and a lot of the questions were around the operational aspects of bringing students back. And so we see the students that are going to come on campus for assessments, and as we go through some of this planning, it's a good first step. And we believe that you have to go slow to go fast, and that we have to be able to, put in place some of these procedures and who's going to do what and what are the path of travel. Because as much as the principals thought about it last summer, early in July and August, or actually it was more early in July, August was scheduling, getting school going. And so we've got to break out those plans, and they'd have to look at that again and see, based on new information, working with all of the departments that Dr. Butler supervises, maintenance, operations, nutrition services, all those different aspects of safety. How do we then make sure that the principals and school staff are comfortable with those students returning and have those checklists in place? So it is a process, but we feel that if we take our time and do it right, and are very clear and explicit in that, then we will be able to then transition more quickly as we get the freedom and authorization to be able to bring other students on campus.
Dr. Crumpy, I wanted to add to what Mr. Hahn said, because he's 100% correct, but also in defense, Dr. Ferrer said that they very specifically do not ask schools upon putting in their documents what you define as your high need, high risk population. So you do not have to define that for them. And she said that was another flexibility that was deliberately written in to assist. The other thing that I think you should ask is, just like restaurants operating at 25% or gyms operating at 10%, that's capacity at the time. We can't exceed 10% at a time, but you might want to double check, because it might be a different 10% on Tuesday that you're servicing than on Monday.
Yes, I believe you're correct, and they've given that example already. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, good. I did want to ask some questions. You know, we continue to be extremely well off in Torrance. You know, our 3-day average is 3.3 repeating, which if we hold out with that 3-day average and continue to the date where these dates that you have, that puts, you know, Torrance in that orange, in the tier 3, in that moderate risk area that Torrance is doing so much better. And so I agree with what Dr. Stowe said. We want to do this careful and right because Torrance is already doing so much right. And we want to make sure that we continue and continue to do that right. And since public health is going to be looking at how all schools handle this part, as we go into the next part in reopening further. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask you three questions related to being safe as we move forward. So we all know that public health is requiring face coverings for all people on campuses, adult, child, worker, visitor, whatever. Do we have any protocols in place explaining what we find as acceptable face coverings? You know, last month the news media did this big thing about, you know, oh, we're just learning now bandanas are useless. Well, no, we knew that back in late March. There's a reason why you know, there were a lot of people in Torrance who were stitching masks and doing triple layer, you know, cotton. People were already in Torrance doing what's right to create masks. Do we have any what is acceptable face coverings in place up front for everyone to know?
Actually, Dr. Crumpy, I can take that one, I believe, as well. We do have in the protocols that all staff have been asked to review and sign a link to how to properly wear your mask. And it does include about covering nose and mouth together. It doesn't say how you build that, but it talks about the right way to wear it. And if you're not doing it correctly with a snug fit, covering nose, covering mouth, then you're not wearing a proper mask. That being said, I will go and review it again. It's been a few weeks since I looked at it to see if it actually talks about how to build a mask or the proper construction of it. And if not, we'll see what supplementary material we can put with that one for you. Not
Great.
For you, for all of us.
Great, because yeah, we now have more research into why double or triple layer is, you know, triple layer being best and comfortable as well. As far as the liability side of things, for people who are offered the opportunity to come back, is there any liability release or some, I don't know if we do active or passive on this. Has there been any discussion about this, you know, that you know, DPH has said, yes, we put on all these protocols, but ultimately parents, you know, have had choice, and I assume continue to have choice. How are we addressing the liability issue and their release and agreement that they do want their child to come back when offered the service?
Sure, still up my alley here on this one. There's a difference between a student doing an educational program and a student or the community doing an extracurricular. So much easier for me to get a specific liability waiver like we do for sports. Whenever a student's going to participate in sports, they sign an extra set of papers than a student who is not participating in sports does. You're able to do that for that extra level of activity. So obviously easy for us to do for our own sports, that yes, they will be signing a waiver similar to the one that I'm getting together for the youth and community. But that's not the same for students coming for an educational program. So we don't have them sign waivers for doing their regular classwork. And here's where it gets really interesting. So you've heard us talking, I believe, at board meetings, but in addition to all the reading that I know you as board members get about liability protections for school districts under COVID-19. So there are a couple main thrusts, and I'll go through those quickly, but one is about workers' compensation. And the state did pass a law stating that COVID-19 is considered a workers' compensation covered activity, whether or not you can prove that you contracted it at work. So that's to get services and support out to individuals who unfortunately have contracted it. So got it. That part's taken care of in the workers' comp system. It still costs us money, don't get me wrong, but at least the liability part falls into the regular processes for workers' comp there. Where it gets a little more interesting is students, just as you mentioned. Both the federal government and the state government have broached the issue, but nobody's solved it yet. So we're hoping that as part of the federal stimulus program that eventually we hope gets approved, there will be some kind of protection in there that will cover school districts as long as there's no gross negligence. Nobody's asking for a free pass on this. We're following DPH. If anything, I think we've done a great job of that in Torrance in making sure that we're sticking with what DPH is telling us. If we do that, if we put in a good effort towards that, then why should we have to go down the road of major lawsuits and just the cost of defending a lawsuit, not even necessarily the final verdict? So again, hoping the feds do that. We also had Assembly Bill 1845 that was being put forward to provide state protection. It seemed that, at least the best as we can read the signals from the state legislators were reluctant to go forward on that ahead of the federal government. They'd rather the feds take the hit for that, if you will, from the Trial Lawyers Association, which we know provides a lot of donations to political campaigns. So they were trying to kick the can down the road. Hasn't happened yet. And so we in the education management side of things are still working very hard to lobby for some additional liability protection for school districts under COVID-19 scenario. Long answer, but I thought each of those pieces were important.
No, I appreciate all that information. The third one is that throughout the process, the state has talked about the importance of a surveillance testing protocol. And so, what I talked about in the last meeting is Torrance Memorial Medical Center is happy to become a partner and help us, but they're still at least a month off before their ability to help us, maybe longer. What role is surveillance testing and meeting that requirement as far as us moving forward with the plan before us?
Let me go for the trifecta here. I'll cover that one too. So on that particular one, obviously you've seen what LA Unified has suggested, which is we're going to test, we're going to take this on ourselves at a cost of $300 per student is what they're estimating.
Yep.
So for us, that's more than $7 million in a year, right? I don't believe that we can take that on and be fiscally responsible and take care of the public health the way that we need to. I don't see that as the school district needing to take care of that the way that LA Unified did, unless what LA Unified might have been trying for is to push the state into doing something and providing a model as a way of doing that. If that's the case, great, but we still need state and or LA County health action in order to really make that happen. So that being said, we obviously have all the information about testing centers that are out there. We're open to working with Torrance Memorial. If you want to send anybody my way, I'll probably be the one heading that up from our side of stuff to get that in place. But we're open to looking at anything, but I don't believe that school district by school district, this will be the solution. I believe it has to be a coordinated effort from the county and or the state.
Just a follow up on that. Dr. Butler, just if you can look into it, Yale just came out with their 15-minute test as well as Abbott Labs. And so just to see, because the Abbott Labs was costing $10. And so these are kind of like the new things that are out there. I'm not sure how available they are or what the process would be, but it'd be kind of good to look into that.
Well, Mr. Hahn, the Abbott Labs module is the one that Torrance Memorial Medical Center purchased. So it is, and they would give us a response in 24 hours.
No, the Abbott Lab is just a saliva 15-minute. You don't need a lab. They just came out with it. And so that's the one I'm talking about. Sorry, Dr. Gerson. It's the 15-minute saliva test that they came out with. The government just ordered 300 million of it. So that's the one I'm talking about, the 15-minute no lab test. But you can just, I don't know how they do it, but they do it.
And I won't go into depth on this because I'm not an expert. I've done my reading and research, but I'll defer to medical experts, obviously. So hopefully I'm not putting my foot in it here. But obviously there are two kinds of testing. We've heard about that. There's the serology testing, and also, so that's to see if it is in your blood right now. And then there's also the, for lack of a better, and I'm forgetting the right term, but an RNA, one that's based on the molecular testing. Thank you. That would say you've had it at some point and have developed antibodies against them. Both of them have their uses. But up until now, the quick testing has just been one that has said either you got something this second or you don't, and that could change 5 minutes from now. It is useful for tracking large trends in a population, but not as useful for the specific individual. Where we need to get to is a consistent, accurate, reliable testing system that looks for the DNA portion, the molecular testing, that does quick turnarounds. And other countries have been able to do much better in this than we have. In my mind, and again, layperson first to admit, but that's the missing piece in really having that public health component locked in to help us be able to detect and take action by quarantining other people so that you're able to stop the spread. We're not there yet, but I promise you we are monitoring as many of these tests that come up to try to find the right solution. Again, still thinking it's a county or a state solution, but we'll keep looking, I promise.
You know, what I learned from public health is there's 3 types. There's the molecular, the antigen, and the serology. The serology is the biggest no. The PCR molecular test is the one that you really want to focus on as far as testing. So
thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Ferrer and your staff so much every time.
Well, now, I wanted to follow up on that 15-minute test. As I've been told, there are some school districts that are stockpiling them to be able to use if and when staff do go back. But I did have a question about special ed for Katie. That Katie, if I'm a parent of a special ed student, I can assume my student will be returning to class, no matter what.
No.
Thank you.
So initially, especially in our first phase, we really are looking at the more severe special education student that has not been able to access special ed services remotely at all, and our nonverbal students. So even in even some of our self-contained classrooms, and there may be 5 levels of those. Initially, we're looking only at the levels 1 and 2. So we're talking in this first phase of rollout to our very most impacted students that often are nonverbal and are unable to make any kind of gains or us have provide services. Many of these families have been waiting and waiting and waiting, hoping for some guidance that would permit home, services that we have not been able to provide. And so they could be able to bring their students to school and have those services, at a school site.
Can I just add to that question?
To start, yes.
Just so basically for that small cohort, then it will be for the severe, moderate to severe cases.
Yes.
Students.
Yes.
Okay.
They're looking at a subset to start of our self-contained classroom students, who are the most severe of those self-contained students.
It will be a select group, and if your child is eligible, you will learn that from the school. Do not assume anything at this point, because we're moving forward, as you said, slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Okay. Any last words, Dr. Stowe, before we move away from that? That was a good update on a number of different subjects. Thank you. All those are important aspects. We will move on to our next discussion, and this is an action item. It's 11.3, and can I get a motion in a second?
So moved.
Wait a second. Please repeat that.
11.3, approving the unaudited actual financial statements for fiscal year 2019, 2020.
I will second that.
Okay, and we will move into the presentation, and I think that's you again, Dr. Butler, is that right?
It is, but only to hand it off to Ms. Chai, who does this a lot better than I do. I'm looking.
Is Judy here somewhere?
No, I'm not seeing her. Okay, maybe we miscommunicated. So would you be so kind, Mr. Marr?
I didn't see her, but I thought she might be.
We're nothing if not flexible.
All right.
So without a lot of preparation on my end, other than the work behind the scenes that Judy and I were doing to get ready for this is now the time where we do our unaudited actual report. And I should just mention there are 4 major reporting periods every year that are required by the state of California. This is the one where you finish off the year and close up the books. So at this point in time, we have finished doing our work to close off 2019-20. We're moving into the next year. And this is a report on what happened with that. Next slide, please. So not a lot of changes overall, except that you can see that we have had a major increase in our ending balance by doing better than we thought we were going to do as we got ready for the beginning of, as we started preparing for the end of the year. And this does have a lot to do with changes that are unique to the year, and we'll show you that on the next slide. So part of what has changed is our ending fund balance. And so that's gone up by not too much as you see on this particular piece. We'll show you more on the next slide, but don't go just yet. These are the smaller components of our ending fund balance. The last one is obviously commitment to pay back the particular loan obligation that we took out for QZABs. So these are items that you have seen consistently. This particular year, and this is one of the interesting points I want to point out, is our stores inventory, which is basically the pencils, et cetera, and supplies that we have available that have been set aside, and you see the value associated with those. All has gone up significantly this year because of PPE purchases. So that's the single biggest reason why we now have more in inventory, if you will, than we have before. Other than that, no major changes here. Next slide, please. So what has changed a little bit here in our ending fund balance, this is now, again, the $2 million increase that we've had in our reserves in the unrestricted general fund. And where this has come up, number one is some expenses that did go up a little bit in terms of student achievement. I'm sorry, these are the reserves, the components of ending fund balance. We did not spend everything that we meant to for student achievement, textbooks, et cetera. And typically that comes from lottery funds that we were not able to fully spend. So those are still set aside to go into those areas. Targeted student groups, we've kept that basically the same. Again, that is unspent funds from supplemental dollars that we've had in prior years that have accumulated at this point. And Dr. Crumpy has a very solid plan for where those dollars are going over the next few years. And then committed to declining enrollment. That's an extra one that we have for this year that we recognize there was a little bit extra as we were looking at the general fund. And we know, even though we are being held harmless for enrollment for this current year, we don't know how long that will continue. We know we're in the middle of declining enrollment. So this is just a way of having a pot of funds that can help us adjust to some unexpected expenses that might be coming up. Again, because we don't have as much on enrollment to backfill those expenses, this will give us a little bit of a room to adjust for that. Or potentially for new programs that we think might be coming up that we were not able to set aside money for in advance. That's another area that this could be used for, but it is in the unrestricted general fund as well. So again, those items combined led us to a little bit larger component of ending fund balance. Then you combine in our reserve for economic uncertainties. Those are the remainder of the items that have fallen to the bottom line. And that puts our reserve for economic uncertainty percentage at 10.61. So a little bit better than what we had estimated at 9.83 before. So we have improved a little bit closing out the books versus what was expected when we first estimated where we would end up for the year. Next slide, please. So some of the variances explained here. What led to that $2 million extra that you were seeing in the reserves for economic uncertainty? Well, part of it is the learning loss mitigation funds that we are spending appropriately, but we were able to reclassify some of that towards last year, meaning we made expenses already in 1920 that were being reimbursed for by the state and federal governments in the learning loss mitigation funds. We also, for 1 year, suspended our contribution to deferred maintenance because we're spending over and above that. So that was only to make sure that we put in the minimum that was required by the state. We're doing that and more at the moment. So no need to put an extra contribution to sit basically in a savings account there for that. We did receive a bump in special education funding. You might remember talk about that as we were at the May revise and then into the adopted budget. So we did get some extra funding from the state for special education, and then a little bit more in our LCFF funding as well. So as I talked about, a $2 million increase to our ending fund balance. This is where it came from. Not items that you would be expecting necessarily on an ongoing basis, but did help on certainly on those first two, but the last two could be continuing. Don't know yet about special ed funding. But in bottom line is we had some extra items that led us to doing a little bit better at the bottom line at the end. Next slide, please. So obviously one of the big things that is not captured in our budget, and this is why we need to be prudent with where we are, is we have not settled. I mentioned earlier, it might have been in closed session, but I've talked about we've got 8 years of contract to settle. We have 2 years for each of our 4 bargaining units that we need to still take care of, 2019-20 and 2020/21. In preliminary conversations, obviously we've been talking with our collective bargaining units because of needing to negotiate memorandums of understanding for reopening. I have mentioned to each of the groups about, would you consider doing 2 years at once, given where we are? 1920 is done, and maybe this is our opportunity to perhaps get ahead of the curve. Are you at all open to that concept? So far, there's openness to the concept, no specific commitment, but they get the idea as well. We have a year in arrears plus the current year that we're in. So we're hoping to get that done, and that potentially has a budget impact, depending, of course, on what is settled. And then the next regular reporting period that we have is first interim. First interim to me is typically one of the key reporting periods because you've adopted your budget, but now you've put it into place. You have all your people hired and going. You've made your expenses that you need to for the start of the year. So that's a real good true up for where we are in the current year as we move forward. And that will be coming to the 12/14/2020 board meeting. Thank you for your time. I will answer as many questions as I can that you might have at this point.
Dr. Butler, Mr. Lee is more in this area than I am and understands it better, but the deferred maintenance, the $500,000, was that originally in the pot that was supposed to replace the 4 high school turf fields? Was that the original place where that was being saved for?
That category in general is the right area for that to be spent from. I can't speak to when the budget was first put together, was that 500 originally earmarked specifically for that? But deferred maintenance is something that turf fields, once they're installed, fit into, yes.
Actually, Dr. Gerson, we use the routine reserve maintenance fund, RRMA, for that set aside for the $500,000, not deferred maintenance.
Okay. Mr. Lee, did you have something to add to that? Yes.
Just a question. How does the reserves for deferred maintenance, the football field, I don't know that I made a big deal about setting aside money to replace football fields. We do have some unencumbered bond money, both locally derived and matching money that we're going to get or have gotten over the next couple of years. I'm just thinking as we kind of scratch our way through the next couple of years, maybe we replace one with the other as we look at that, because we can reserve those bond funds, I think, at least out until those fields need to be replaced in probably, I'm guessing, 9 years. And from what I remember, they'll probably be north of $1 million a piece, as I remember. So can we set aside some of the bond money that we have currently in reserve to then replace what we were setting aside every year for football field replacements, and then be able to roll that back into the general plan to give us some more flexibility?
Got it. So just one technicality, I apologize for having to point out, but I think it's important here. It is that bond money itself, money that comes from the sale of bonds, has to be expended within a 3-year period of that money actually coming to you. So we have spent the bond money within those time periods. Eventually we get some reimbursements from the state for their share of things that we can do exactly what you're talking about. So just Just in case there are any bond eagles out there.
You know, I'll be long gone, but I think yeah, strategy, because we're owed significantly more money than they paid us already. I suspect over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, they'll get around to paying us. And then maybe we can set that aside in the deferred maintenance accounts, not only for football fields, but maybe for roofs and other things that have paint and other things that wear out. And maybe we can use that for deferred maintenance and then move that other money into the general fund.
Yes, Dr. Stowe has asked that we move towards when we can. Right now, our board meetings are around reopening and student learning. Totally get it. But at some point that we have a board conversation about what we do with some of the surplus funds that are still out there for finishing up some of the bond areas, the reimbursements. But yes, to get your opinion, to weigh in on what that looks like as we use up the rest of the funds that are available. And one thing that I have already discussed with Mr. Kempton, I would like to see what is our deferred maintenance plan and strategy, routine restricted maintenance plan and strategy, and dollars involved as we now move forward with these facilities that we've been able to get into really good shape from where they were. So I'd like some work on his end combined with what the board would talk about to have a plan and a strategy for how we use the rest of the facilities funds that are available to us.
You know, not to be completely selfish, but since I have Dr. Stowe reminded me I have 5 meetings to go. You too, Mrs. Reagans. I'd like to have that done in the next 5 meetings, if that's possible.
I'd say that's a wonderful request, and give us a little bit of time to figure out what we can do. But I get the request.
Thank you very much.
Actually, Dr. Butler, I wanted to get an opinion about how the first interim is going to look after such an odd opening for school and not knowing how long that's going to last. It's going to be strange.
It is going to be strange. I will say this, you know, again, thankfully, the state did take the direction or the action of doing some deferrals of funds to be sure to give us enough to at least give us time to adjust this year. You've heard me use that phrase probably already too many times, and you'll hear it a lot more. We have time to adjust. So now our work is incumbent on, in my opinion, a budget advisory committee that helps inform the board as we move forward, and a very, very thoughtful 21/22 budget that recognizes that we're not likely going to be out of the woods very quickly. Having input from a budget advisory committee that helps us look at both revenue enhancements and expenditure reductions that might be out there for us, but understanding this is going to be a much more involved effort going forward, I do believe, to come up with a sustainable, financially sound, learner-focused budget for the district moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Any last comments, questions from anyone? Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the unaudited actual financial statements for fiscal year 2019-2020 and approve revisions to the 2020-2021 ending fund balances. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. And our last discussion action item, approval of polling places for the 2020 presidential general election.
Well, if you haven't heard enough from me, I think I'll take this one and go forward if you have a motion.
So moved.
Actually, this isn't a motion then, is it, Dr. Stowe?
Yeah, it is actually
Okay,
it's
my
an
bad.
approval. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
So-
Dr. Butler, you're on.
Thank you. I'll give just a little bit of context, and you'll see that we're joined by Aaron Navarez from the LA County Registrar's Office, who will be taking the main questions that you have for this. But as you know, in the March election, we had, I believe it was 17 voting centers that helped the county and obviously all the voters in the county get used to a new voting system. And so that has happened. We overall had a successful election in terms of people casting ballots and counting them. Some of the behind the scenes stuff, both in terms of the school district, dare I say for the LA County Registrar Recorder's Office as well, was a very difficult process to get through March, but I think we did. And now the county has come back, the Registrar's Office has asked for additional sites for the November election. They originally proposed 7 sites. We talked about a couple of those. We're down to the 5 that you see there, at least as of the time that we put the board item together. And Mr. Navarez might speak to a couple of additional sites, I believe, that they're also thinking about too. I do want to point out one significant difference for the board just in terms of finances. And I am in no way suggesting that finances take precedence over voting. It's my job as a fiduciary responsibility of the district to put this piece out there. You were able to get reimbursed for, I believe it was approximately $45,000 in expenses in March that were done in order to make this happen. The reason why you were reimbursed was because you had no measure and no election on that ballot. There was no board election, there was no measure. In Palos Verdes, we had a bond election on there. So basically anything that we charged them extra, we were going to be charged back for it. There was no net gain to the district for doing all of the extra pieces that were required by the county registrar's office. This time it's a little different. It's done on a proportional basis. The concept is the same. If we put in extra costs, other districts are doing that as well, and that will increase our cost of election that we end up paying. So just having to do that from a fiduciary point of view, but that is probably a minor consideration to how many vote centers do we feel that we can properly put up and staff. So with that, Mr. Navarez, is there anything you'd like to let the board know? Oh, you're muted right now.
Mute.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. Thank you, Honorable Board. I appreciate the time tonight. Again, Aaron Navarez from the Registrar Recorder County Clerk. I oversee election operations and logistics for Los Angeles County. In addition, a couple schools that have recently come up in vacant areas that we would like to add as a request to the district are Hamilton Adult School and Walteria Elementary School. As Dr. Butler said, again, our original request had 7, was pared down to 5, which you see on your board agenda tonight for approval. We would like to simply request that the board consider these 2 additional schools. As I think your board appreciates the dynamic and challenge that the pandemic has had on your core mission. We've been tremendously impacted by the pandemic as well in terms of recruiting an adequate number of vote centers for Los Angeles County. One thing to note for the board is that we will be sending all registered voters a vote by mail ballot. So that's one of the reasons why there's been such a significant reduction in the vote centers, but the overall recruitment of vote centers has been exponentially more difficult in this new environment. And so we are seeking some additional support from districts across the county to support this effort. We've been slightly disappointed by some other jurisdictions in the area, I'll just say, in terms of their participation with this effort. So in many cases, schools are not our first priority in terms of getting, because we know the impact that this has, having, voters come from outside of the facility onto campus. We have a full presidential safe plan related to COVID protocols and DPH protocols that we've been working very closely with the Department of Public Health on. So we believe we have a plan that will put the safety of voters, workers, and the campuses at high priority, but there is just significant need for vote centers in this area, and that's why we would respectfully request 2 additional sites to be considered to provide adequate coverage for not only voters from Torrance who might be voting in Torrance, but voters from all Los Angeles County, which our vote centers will allow for. So that is the request to the board, not only the 5 that are on the agenda tonight, but 2 additional. I'd be happy to address any questions that the board has, and thank you for your time and attention tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have 2 logistical questions. One, why do you have 2 schools within a block of each other in the north end? You have North High School and Yukon Elementary School.
In many cases, Madam President, it is simply we need an adequate number of facilities across the county. For a variety of reasons, some schools might not have adequate space. One of the elements that I mentioned before was the COVID planning. So we given the social distancing requirements that we have to have, we're looking for much larger facilities, much larger rooms. So that could be a particular reason. Other locations simply have refused. And so again, we're needing to provide locations across Los Angeles County. Sometimes they're closed. I will make a note of those particular schools, the fact that they are so close, to make sure that that's accurate, but it most likely has to do with simply the need for additional locations throughout Los Angeles County.
And is the length of the voting going to be the same as it was before, or what will be the requirement for the facilities?
The requirement for the ask for these particular facilities is a 5-day voting period, meaning that the vote centers would open to the public, to our voters, on Friday, October 30th, and would go through Tuesday, November 3rd. Again, we will have 11-day vote centers, but none of the vote centers or the sites in Torrance Unified are going to be 11-day sites. They're all going to be 5-day sites. So it's a 5-day opening for voters. Again, there's some need on some days before and some days after for the setup, and we'll negotiate all of that with your team. We've been working very closely with Dr. Butler and his team to kind of iron out those details.
Okay, any other questions from other board members? Mr. Lee.
How much are we being charged to do our election this year?
Well, I was provided with the calculator from the Registrar Recorder's Office. It does not have our additional costs that we might incur ourselves, but it was approximately $270,000.
What additional costs could we incur?
Well, when we did it in March, we had security that we were trying to keep students separated from the voters. And that one's almost a roll of the dice at this point. Do we have students back in that we have those extra? If I knew students weren't going to be on campus through November 3rd, this would be a much easier conversation. But I don't know that, and we're definitely working to try to get students back. So if they're back, we'll have security costs.
I'm looking at a budget that we just talked about that we're a little tight. And we're doing this out of our generosity because it's, when I understand, we can say no and have no voting centers at any of our locations, correct?
It's a bit of a gray area. Number one, we have civic duty and participation. We all understand that. There is an encouragement, a strong encouragement from the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. There are letters that have come from the county as well, the Board of Supervisors, stating that you should make facilities available. And the practicality of that is, who's going to sue who over that?
Well, here's all I'm saying. And, I'm in business, so I got to make a budget and I got to make a living. Is when somebody throws cost at me without any offsets, I get a little cranky. And so I'm being charged the district's being charged $270,000 for an election. Okay, that's part of our budget. But now with COVID and it used to be a day it was one day. It was the first Tuesday after the first Monday. Mm-hmm. Now it's 3 or 5 days. Anybody from the county can walk in there. It isn't just people from Torrance. Anybody can walk in there. I did go to Jefferson School when, last time in November when the election. It was a very nice setup, but it was big and there were a lot of people around there. And if we've got kids in and out of there with COVID protocols and everything else, I'm not saying we don't do it, but you just said if we incur extra cost and we're scrambling for money on the other side of the budget, but if we charge the county any money, they're just going to offset it and charge it back to us. This doesn't work very well for me. So there's the county guy over there that's going to answer this question.
Remember, Lee, I appreciate the comment, and I respectfully hear. One thing I will say is on the reimbursement. So whether it's security, whether it's custodial, on the front end, we will reimburse whatever costs the district incurs. So again, if it's custodial, if any sort of costs on the operational side, we will work to reimburse. That's on the front end. Now, obviously on the back end, as Dr. Butler said, there will be the cost for running that election. One of the things to note is the reason why we go after or seek public facilities for this is typically we can get public facilities at I'll say a more reasonable cost. In the absence of public facilities, we have to go to private facilities. Private facilities, have rental costs and substantially more costs per vote center if we go the private route. Obviously, all those costs are packaged into what is that proportional share of the election costs that Dr. Butler mentioned. So, in some way, inadvertently, or you will be receiving a lesser election cost by allowing us to utilize the public facility because it's a cheaper cost. Again, we will reimburse for whatever cost that the district incurs on the front end. And then the bill on the back end is that proportional cost of the election that has to do with, your registered voters, the contests on the elections and elements like that, which obviously are part of that calculus. But that's sort of the roundabout way of saying, allowing the use of public facilities like schools does allow for a lower cost on the vote center operation side, which is a significant portion of the overall election cost. So
I understand what you're saying. I mean, but what do we get for our 270? What do we get for our $270,000? So none of these extra costs, like when you did your budget for this election at 270, you didn't factor in the costs for security or custodial or any of these things at locations?
No, we did, and those are part of the estimates that are part of that calculator that Dr. Butler mentioned. That's how we make the calculator that we provide to jurisdictions to do their estimates. It's a little bit different when the actual jurisdiction is conducting or requesting us to conduct their election as well, because as was mentioned in March, you were reimbursed fully because you gave us the cost for custodial and we repaid those costs. There was no additional cost to the jurisdiction because you weren't conducting an election. In November, you are conducting an election, so it's a little bit apples to oranges in terms of that, but it's obviously a much more substantial cost for you because you're conducting an election.
So basically, we're gonna let you use these 5 or 6 sites, which I fully understand that's what we have to do in elections. We're gonna pay the county $270,000, and then in effect, there's a blank check on the backside that I have no idea what it's gonna be once I assign all my direct costs to you. In other words, let's say our direct costs are $45,000 again. That's half a teacher, right? That's half a teacher. And I'm going to give you a bill for $45,000, and then it's kind of up to you to decide, well, it was this and it was that, so here's $2,000 because we had $43,000 of extra whatever. That's the way it's sounding to me. It's hard for me to sell insurance this way, so I'm just asking you.
Yeah, I would ask Dr. Butler, if the costs were 45 in March, what was the reimbursement?
I believe we were reimbursed entirely. I was not in the district then, but I believe it was a full reimbursement.
Yes, we were reimbursed 100% of our expenses.
Yeah, typically, Board Member Lee, we reasonable expenses, we will repay without question. Oftentimes a lot of the negotiating on the private sites when they're charging us, exorbitant rental fees and things like that, but for things like direct payments for custodians and security, things like that, there shouldn't be any issues with reimbursement in those regards.
So we'll be reimbursed 100% for those things.
Yes.
And my 270 is still solid.
Correct.
The 270 though might be more than you would pay if there weren't all these reimbursements necessary for school districts around the county. Actually, I just figured out a way to game the system. I just charge rent that's larger than the cost of our election, right? And then I make it back and we're all good.
Well, that thought occurred to me, but the county's already thought of that as well. I'm assuming, but see, here's what it's going to be what it's going to be, but we're anticipating paying you $270,000. we anticipate, let's say it's the same as last time, $45,000. So we'll submit the bill for $45,000, and then a month or two later you go, oops, it was a little more, we need another 35 grand back from you.
Are you referring to the request for reimbursement on the direct costs or on the election?
Well, what you're saying is that let's say we anticipate 270 as our cost. What you said in your initial statement was whatever we're charging you could be offset by additional charges. So I need to know what that is, so I know that I can be reimbursed for my $45,000. It sounds like it's almost like movie accounting. Somebody else's, the profit somehow gets diluted and nobody gets paid. So what you're telling me is it's all open-ended on the backside. So,
I would look at
submit the $45,000 because you're going to find a way to make it all go away.
No, and again, we're doing this in partnership with the district. Every district we work with, you're all our partners. At the end of the day, we're also conducting the election on behalf of your voters. And so I would look at the two things as really two distinct processes. The reimbursement for direct costs is separate and apart, and it may not seem like it for the district. It's separate and apart from the election bill you'll get at the end. The 270, that is an estimate. That could go up, it could go down. That is always the process for when we provide election estimates. We're required by law to recoup all direct costs from jurisdictions who have an election share of that. So I anticipate whatever direct costs the district incurs for our use of their sites, we will directly reimburse to the district upon receipt of the invoices for this election. And then at some point after the election, usually 3 to 6 months after, the bills come for the election, and those are direct proportional costs of the election. So there's no funny math that's done. It's simply our accountants will take that proportional share and bill the jurisdictions appropriately.
Okay, last question. The city decided not to have the election boxes in the city of Torrance. Has that affected what our impact or what you're asking us to do?
I was going to see where the board went tonight before bringing it up. The city of Torrance is the one city outside of a couple cities like Vernon who have no voters, who have decided not to host vote by mail drop-off boxes. As I mentioned, that was a very disappointing decision for a lot of people. I think it was disappointing for our office because our office tries everything we can to provide adequate geographic distribution. I think it's disappointing for the voters of Torrance who now have to go places like Redondo Beach or Carson or surrounding jurisdictions. If the board would be so inclined, while we don't always put drop boxes at school facilities or at district facilities, if the Torrance Unified School District would like to entertain that, we will definitely be willing to have that conversation. Again, those are boxes that we install at cost, we maintain, and do all the pickups for the ballots throughout the election process. So we are currently, I don't want to say scrambling, but we're looking for other venues in the city of Torrance. We have to go generally private for those, but the city's position, I've heard we're going to go back on their agenda next week, and there may be some reconsideration. But I guess I would say, Mr. Lee, is that if that's something that the district would like to consider, we can definitely have that follow-up conversation with Dr. Butler and see if there's opportunities for that. Again, we're not reliant on that. We do have good coverage throughout the county. Currently, Torrance is a little bit barren because of the decision from the city of Torrance.
Can we get some relief on the 270 if we allow the boxes?
I think we would be willing to entertain some conversation there. Again, we have to be careful. Again, all we do is provide the direct cost back to the jurisdiction. So
Let me ask something that might be a little more realistic, but I like the idea. And that might be, if we're doing drop boxes, would you need fewer voting centers?
Dr. Butler, it really is it's a separate issue. Every vote center is a drop-off location.
Right.
So in some ways, we're trying to, our minimum required threshold by law is about 383. I think we're approaching 400 at this point. So we do have good coverage throughout the county. We simply have a lack of coverage in the city of Torrance right now, given that the city has completely decided not to participate. Our boxes are brand new boxes, very stylish. I think they would look good on district campuses maybe. So something to consider. Again, joking aside, if that's something that the district would like to consider, we can definitely follow up with Dr. Butler, provide that information, provide the requirements of the boxes and the agreements and things like that. But it really is an opportunity potentially for Torrance Unified to potentially fill a gap that has been left by the city at this point.
And I think the only extra thing to add is whatever you decide this evening, this will be what we go forward with more than likely, including if you give us some latitude to do some boxes and maybe see if we can trade a site. But this all needs to be finalized before our next board meeting.
Very soon.
Well, I have it from a reliable source that they are going to reconsider at their board meeting or at their council meeting next week. And I hope that their decision will be different. But the fewer sites that we run, the less cost we will incur. Is that correct, Dr. Butler?
Absolutely.
So I would like to stick with the 5. That's my opinion, but I actually do think you should switch off North or Yukon, one or the other, but Hamilton is another block away the other direction. So they're all in exactly the same vicinity. But I don't believe that Walteria has access without going onto campus. Is that right, Dr. Stepp?
Yeah, I'm not sure what facility they were looking at for Walteria.
It says multi-purpose room.
Okay, so there is access.
You could enter from the back off the parking lot.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So, Mr. Navarez, thank you so much for your time. And so I have some serious issues with this. Number one is I was not very happy with the last election. I was at Hall. I saw the way it was set up. It was chaos. And when they left, even though it may be our fault that our gym floors were scratched, it was just the thought behind it, how long it took. The pods were there for how long? 5 months, like 6 months in our parking lot. It was just not well planned out. And to me, this election is going to be larger because it's a presidential election. I just can't imagine all the chaos and and the thing is, we're trying to bring our kids back on. We're going to have these small cohorts on campus. And the county is telling us we cannot have anybody come on campus, but all of a sudden on election day, we're going to have thousands coming on campus, and that's going to be okay. No, that's not okay. My thing is, if we're going to have this, then you know what? 10% at each school. Whatever our school population is, you can only have 10% in that building. No cross mixing, or we have to go outdoors. Oh. Hello? Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No cross mixing, no, 10% people, or you have to have it outdoors. This is our restriction. It's always been our restriction. And I get it, it's election day, but they have made no exceptions for us. We have applied Department of County Health, unless they say on that day, we're going to lift all protocols, then so be it. But we have our protocols. Our protocols are, you cannot have any outside people groups on campus. So I'm going to follow DPH. Until DPH changes that order, we cannot allow this. We are violating DPH's orders to allow polling centers on our campuses per DPH order. No outside groups are on campus.
So,
am I incorrect on that?
A couple things. Good questions, Mr. Hahn. So I'll start with March. So we fully realized the challenges that we had in March. This was the first rollout of an entirely new system, the first rollout of an entirely new election model. And in some ways, we had some significant challenges there. We're the first to own that. Apologies and thanks to the district for their work with us. One of the things that you should note is that the way we're going to be deploying the equipment, setting up the equipment, is going to be on a much different model. We're no longer going to be doing it in-house. Our department runs elections. We are not a transportation and logistics firm. We realized that and proposed to our board to hire an outside vendor to do that. So there's not going to be any pause. It's going to be on-time deployment. So whatever day we tell Torrance Unified that we're coming to North High, we'll be there on that day. We'll set up on that day. If we say we're going to be gone, the Thursday after Election Day, we will pick it up on the Thursday after Election Day and we'll be gone. So just want to start there with, again, the apologies for some of the sort of missteps in March and the commitment to making sure that we make things right and do things right in November. The second point on the sort of cross-contamination of students with the DPH orders, that was a very common sort of pushback we got from districts from the very beginning. And one of the things that we did very early on was we worked with Dr. Ferrer and her team at DPH. She has sent a letter to the registrar recorder, which very clearly articulates the exact concern you have and very clearly articulates the recommendation, the strong recommendation that schools partner with the county for vote centers. There was also a similar letter at the State Department of Public Health that we can share. Dr. Butler, I believe you have those, and again, we can share those. But the Department of Public Health has very clearly stated that that order was in no way to stop the use of schools as vote centers. The schools were very clearly called out in the governor's executive order on the election, and so we really believe that there is a path forward here. We believe that our plan to conduct the election, which has been vetted by the Department of Public Health, is intentionally focused on the site that we'll be at, and is very clearly focused on the health and safety of our voters and the health and safety of our workers. That means PPE across the board for everyone who's going to be on the site, pre-checks for all vote center workers, social distancing throughout. We have a stop station before voters even come on into the vote center to make sure that they have a mask, to make sure that if they would like gloves, to make sure they know all the protocols going in. So we've spent significant amount of time putting this plan together, and we believe that if we can have these sites and work with your district to have these sites, we can conduct this election, this very important election, which again, the district has measures and contests on this that we're doing it in a way that's collaborative with the district. Your team has been working very, very closely with us, and we want to continue that. We understand the concerns that you have, Mr. Hahn, and we're going to do everything we can to mitigate them and make sure that we have a successful election.
I appreciate that. But again, not to be facetious, but obviously election is more important than education because risk is risk, and if the COVID's real, and so risk is risk. And so they're saying election is more important than education. I'm just saying that it just, to me, it's just hypocritical. And that's my whole, nothing against you, it's just this whole process that they're asking our schools, when kids will be present on campus, that we're gonna have all of the people come out. When they're asking us, do not have anyone interacting with any or close by the kids. I'm just, it's extremely frustrating.
Mr. Navarez, Dr. Gerson over here. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for coming. We didn't have anyone last year come, so I appreciate you. And also thank you to the Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder's Office. I've met a great many very professional people, especially when you go upstairs. Surprising how kind and patient and helpful so much of the staff has been over the last couple of years since I've been elected. And I do want to express appreciation for that. And I want to express appreciation for your full reimbursement last year. Like Mr. Hahn, I also voted no last year for some very serious security concerns. I mean, you've probably heard this before, but if not, you know, we have taken security so important. Anytime someone enters campus, we scan their California or whatever issued ID. We've paid for a system that scans all 50 databases, for all 50 state databases for Megan's Law, to make sure that the people who come onto campus are not a known risk to children. You know, we can't protect our kids from everything, but we do everything we can to protect them from as much as we can. And so my concerns last year still stemmed around basic safety. We are bringing children back. There will be children back on campus during the election time. And you can't ask for someone's ID if they're voting. There's so many things you can't do. And so my concerns still remain around the physical safety and emotional safety of our children. And so there is some relief hearing that we can expect full reimbursement for things such as security and whatever the district needs to do to protect the children on campus, because that still remains my #1 most important thing. And so if you're still telling me that we can feel certain that things like security and custodial will be reimbursed, that, as Mr. Lee was trying to point out, that helps alleviate some of probably my largest concern about this. On the order itself, I did want to ask Dr. Butler, I see the 5 schools, we've been asked for the 2 additional sites, but right underneath the table it says permission to use all school sites would be given with the stipulation that such use will not interfere with the operation of the schools. You all know, as a math teacher, you all know attention to precision is something that I have trouble with. So there's to me a conflict. Are we approving 5 sites, 7 sites, or are we saying definitely these 7, but we're also approving anything else that Dr. Butler approves later? Please clarify that.
The item was presented as the approval of the 5 sites you see listed and referring to all of those sites. The clarification is duly noted.
Thank you.
And I think that the board would have to amend the motion if the board is so interested in allowing the utilization of the additional 2 sites requested.
Okay. And then I wanted to briefly touch on the voter boxes. I am comfortable with the district office, and I'm comfortable with all adult school sites for these purposes, because they don't directly don't produce any endangerment to children. So I am okay with that amendment as well, if the board so chooses to go that direction.
So I'll just jump in, Dr. Gerson. First off, thank you for the kind words regarding staff. I'll make sure I convey that back to Dean Logan, our director. We appreciate those comments. Definitely, if the board does decide to move forward with any sort of Dropbox discussion, we can start that discussion as soon as you're ready, Dr. Butler, and provide you that information regarding that. Again, would respectfully request that the board does consider the addition of the 2 sites. Again, we are fully committed to reimbursing the district on any direct costs. That's a commitment from our department. So again, with that, a respectful request.
Thank you for the time, President Reagan.
Any other comments, questions? One of the considerations that was made this year, and I know it was only made because we sort of pressed the issue, was that the school sites that are being considered are ones that allow access from the outside and do not allow access to the main campus. So there will not be actually extra people on campus aside from being in a contained room where they are permitted to do their voting activities. So that is somewhat reassuring to me, but I do think it is a consideration that we are bringing potential exposure to our campuses. And that is a difficult thing to allow to happen, especially when there's cost incurred to allow for that to happen. But I do strongly feel that it is a civic responsibility that schools participate and have always participated. So I don't want to see us not provide that as a resource.
And can I make a suggestion?
Well, one point of
Sure.
information on
Yes.
the Levy Adult Center, that
Yes.
multipurpose room is inside of the gate, but it's an adult school, so I felt
Right.
that was
Right.
still a possibility. Okay, just want to make
Yeah.
sure.
No, yeah,
Then to mitigate the risk, can we ask Dr. Crumpy that we do not have students at home at the schools that are listed there? Because again, we're not going to have that many in the cohorts, you know, unless you anticipate more than you think, Dr. Crumpy. So is it possible that we don't have them at North, West, Hall? What was the other two? Libby was one, and UConn. Can we not have students there and try to do it all the other side, just so that we don't have any cross people?
I would not suggest that.
I don't think you can do that.
We could certainly work with the registrar recorder's office on making sure that the entrance for students is not near the where voters may come in on those particular days. But the whole purpose of the cohorts is to be able to bring students back to their home school with their teachers. And there's so many teachers that are actually teaching on their campuses. And so that further limits the number of rooms available. So, I certainly understand the concern, and maybe that's something that we can work with, setting up some barriers or different areas where on those days that we have students being dropped off on opposite sides of campus, or in very different areas, separated by some sort of barrier and signage.
And I will say, from our office's perspective, to Dr. Stowe's point, we're 100% committed to making sure that we work with the district on a site-by-site basis to make sure that the entrances, the exits, everything is in line with the precautions that the district wants for these facilities. So we're 100% committed to that.
President, I would like to make.
Go ahead.
Vaughn, go ahead.
Sure,
We're recording this, Mr. Navarez.
Mrs. Liu?
Yes, I'd like to make an amended motion to give our superintendent, Dr. Stowe, and also Dr. Butler, the discretion to approve up to the 7 sites requested by LA County, and also whether that we allowed in ballot boxes, upon understanding that the two parties will discuss this some more and have better idea what the numbers are. So
I think we should make that decision here.
Yeah, I'm kind of inclined that we maybe need to hatch this out, even though it's getting close to 11 o'clock at night, and I have not had a taco yet. But anyway, so the box thing, I think we can leave open until the city decides. I mean, that's kind of in their court. If they decide they're going to put the boxes back in, then we don't need to deal with it. So I'm not sure we can deal with that right now. I'm sure the county can come back at our next meeting if they want to talk about boxes, because that's not as critical as the locations. I'm not a big fan of Walteria, just the way you got to get in and out of there. I don't like.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with Hamilton. Hamilton's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I think UConn and North make no sense across the street from one another. But I guess, I mean, they got to figure it out, not us. I guess I don't have a problem adding Hamilton. I got a problem adding Walteria. So And I'll leave the box thing open until the city of Torrance decides what they want to do. So I'm inclined to make a substitute motion.
Wait a minute, we already have an amended an amended motion that Betty was offering. Betty, do you want to put that motion forward?
I can amend the amended motion.
No. Do you want to do your amended motion? Or do you
I do, but can I just clarify something with Dr. Butler?
Yes.
Did you say that this all needs to be decided before our next board meeting?
The registrar's office was kindly twisting arms to have this all done by September the 10th, and I believe that's tomorrow.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the purpose of that, as you all know, is we produce a sample ballot, and sample ballots, when we're producing 5.7 million of them, the production timeline, lead times for us are well in advance of when we actually send those. So we want to try to get as many of these vote centers committed and sort of agreed upon so we can print them for our voters, so that when they look on their sample ballot and they're a Torrance voter, they see their North High vote center on their sample ballot. So there is some urgency. Again, that can slip a little bit. The impact of that is perhaps the Torrance vote centers aren't on the sample ballot, which does have an impact for Torrance voters.
President Linden, you mentioned
so still for parliamentary procedure, Mrs. Liu, if you want to offer your amended motion, we need to vote on that first. But you offered the motion. Do you still want it to be on the floor?
Actually, I think there's a good point about Yukon and North High being in such close proximities, and also Ulterior might not be a very good idea. So I still would like to put forward the motion, except that I want to give Dr. Stowe and Dr. Butler the discretion, but to approve up to 7 locations, but also not necessarily the 5, or not necessarily the 7 that's requested by LA County, but rather get rid of either Yukon or North High.
Okay, so we have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, I see no second, so the motion dies without a second. Mr. Lee, you said you had a substitute motion to offer.
Yeah, my substitute motion is to add Hamilton. I mean, Con and North High, if they want them that close, so be it. It's not our call, really. I mean, I have no problem eliminating one if it can give me a second.
Who made the original motions, Shelley?
James.
Okay, so that was James' original motion.
So
okay.
So I'll offer an amended motion. I'll just try here. Adding Hamilton, deleting Yukon, and that's the deal.
And can I ask for clarification?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mean that we add Hamilton, delete Yukon, and just keep it and approving the 5 sites?
Correct. Because Walteria has been asked for, but it's not in the item.
Yeah, I don't think we need to give that either.
Okay, so again, in terms of parliamentary procedure, you're saying that you want to offer an amendment, Mr. Lee. You want to remove Yukon but add Hamilton. That's the amendment you want to make. We haven't voted on the main motion at all yet, but we need to vote on the amendment first.
The one
so do people,
we made at the beginning of the item.
Yes, so do people agree that you want to, he is suggesting that we add Hamilton but remove Yukon. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so we're voting just on that amendment. We're not voting for the voting voting locations yet.
God, I can tell you.
Just the amendment.
Good, okay, good.
I'm just trying to keep this straight.
Good job.
So we have a motion and a second that we amend to say that we will add Hamilton but remove Yukon from consideration. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that amendment is passed. Now we need to go back to the main motion, which was to approve 5 voting centers. All right, is there any more discussion on that? Okay, so I have a motion and a second that we approve 5 voting centers for the use by the county for the 2020 presidential general election. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? No. Okay, so we have just said we have approved 5 polling places, but that we want to have it be Hamilton and not Yukon as one of the 5.
Correct.
Is that accurate, as according to everybody else here?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, all right, I think we got it.
And I'd just like to say a quick thank you to Mars. I know that he put in about 3 hours for this board meeting tonight.
Thank you.
We are not normally here this long, sir. So
I appreciate your guys' time. You have a lot on your plate. Can't imagine the challenges as a father of 2 children myself who are in middle school and elementary. I just appreciate what you guys are doing on behalf of the kids in your district, and thank you for your time. Dr. Butler, we will follow up on the 5 schools, and we'll see what happens with Torrance next week, and maybe we'll come back and talk to you after that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
thank you very much. Okay, so we do actually have our consent agenda yet to deal with.
Go ahead, Don.
Okay. Hang with me, because I can get us out of here before 11. Make a motion to approve consent items 19 through 20, 13 through 19, all inclusive, and also make a motion to adjourn in memory of retired teacher and assistant principal Catherine Stock, retired teacher Barbara Johnson, nutrition services assistant 1 Janet Sanders, and transition program para-ed tier 2 Teresa Rooney.
So second.
Okay, so there's been a motion and a second that we approve all of the consent items from 13 through 19, including adjournment. But first I need to know from Mr. Hahn, is there a SoCal Rock report?
So just an update on SoCal Rock. So we've asked all the superintendents from all our school district, all the JPAs, to support SoCal Rock publicly. We're going to prepare a statement, and we're hoping that all our superintendents would support that statement. And that's one big agenda item. And again, I think that we're all in this partnership together, and we're trying to figure out how can we come along and support SoCal Rock, especially at a time like this. You know, just as our adult school has dental services classes, so does SoCal Rock. And so there's a lot of, you know, Madam President, how we overlap. And so I think that we need to have support from our superintendents that we're supportive of SoCal Rock. And so we're working on that right now.
Okay, thank you for that update. But we have a motion and a second, and I will even hold my anniversary increments for next time, Mr. Lee, since you've made this wondrous motion. All those in favor of adjourning in memoriam of the aforementioned people, say aye.
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 Wait a minute, wait a minute.
Oh,
I forgot to take the vote on all the consent agenda.
yeah.
It's all one motion.
Oh yeah, it's all one thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. The way I stated it was not good. So we're going to take a vote on the entire consent, including adjournment. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye, and no, motion carried. Sorry it took so long this evening, but we had a great meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye, everyone.
Always a salesman, Mr. Lee.
That's the first time I think you've done that, right? Everything, including the German.